Jay gets paid today, so we're starting the clapping. Welcome to the Utah Transit Authority, and on behalf of not only UTA, but our many partners that made today's event possible. We have a great agenda ahead of us and some important things to learn and to have discussions, the first of many. As mentioned, I'm Carlton Christensen. I'm Chair of the Board of Trustees for the Utah Transit Authority. On behalf of my fellow trustees, Beth Holbrook and Jeff Acerson, as well as our Executive Director, Jay Fox, we welcome you to the Utah Transit Authorities and today's Transportation Electrification Forum. We appreciate that you're taking a Friday to meet with us. Your presence says a lot about the opportunity that is before us. Our purpose is to lay the foundation of a shared vision for an electrified transportation infrastructure across the Wasatch Front. I'm highly confident in our collaboration capacity as public transit officials, local, state, and federal elected officials, and along with the business community, educators, and industry experts, that together we have the potential to enhance Utah's economic development, air quality, community connections, and overall quality of life. We're striving as an agency toward these goals, and at our most recent meeting, the UTA board discussed a new strategy to move forward with a 40% battery electric fleet within the next 20 years. However, the progress we can all accomplish working together will far exceed what we can do individually. Thank you for choosing to take part of this conversation today. Let's make this the first of many discussions, as well as our milestones to come. Please enjoy the rest of the day.
Please welcome the Executive Director of the Wasatch Front Regional Council, Andrew Gruber.
Good morning. I really like the way that sounds over the microphone. Can you say that one more time? Say my name one more time.
Andrew Gruber.
Isn't that cool? It's really fun when your day starts out by somebody doing that. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today as we work together to shape the future of Utah's transportation system electrification. As you just heard, I'm Andrew Gruber. I'm Executive Director of the Wasatch Front Regional Council. So we're the metropolitan planning organization for the majority of Utah's Wasatch Front. So we bring together the transportation agencies, so UDOT, UTA, the cities and the counties and other stakeholders to plan for the future of transportation here in Utah. And I want to give big thanks to UTA, the whole team, the trustees and the staff for convening this event today, because over the course of today, right here in the room right now, and then over the course of today, we're going to have with us transportation stakeholders, education, utilities, industry and other business, government from all levels and all sectors, and community leaders, all of you, to work together on these critical issues that we're facing as a community. And we know that we are facing really significant environmental and climate challenges, right? Globally, here in our country, in Utah, and right here in our region. You know, we've struggled with air quality issues for a long time, PM 2.5 in the winter and ozone in the summer. Rising temperatures, limited water supply, and the challenges that creates for the Great Salt Lake. Wildfires and other extreme weather events. And all of these issues create impacts for us, for our individual health and our family health, our well-being. Our state's economic growth is impacted by this, and our overall quality of life. So these issues could not be more important. Now, we may not be able to control what happens globally. We may not be able to control what happens nationally, but we can take action here in Utah. Now, in Utah, we know that transportation is the largest single source of emissions, those emissions that are having the impacts on our environment and on our climate. And we also know that over the past decade, Utah is the fastest growing state in the entire nation. And as a result of that growth, we have more transportation demand. Now, the good news is that we've had dramatic reductions in our transportation emissions. Why is this happening? Well, part of the reason is because we've made a really concerted effort to provide more transportation choices to people. People can drive and have a safe and effective roadway network, and also have a really viable choice to take transit, to bike, or to walk, to give people an option to do something other than using their cars. But the primary reason, the most significant reason that we've had a reduction in our transportation emissions is because we have newer and cleaner vehicles. And the cleanest of all vehicles are? Electric, exactly. But now, electric vehicles right now represent only a very small percentage of the overall vehicle fleet. So that could be disappointing, but really the way to look at that, I think, is that it creates a huge potential, an opportunity for a broader adoption of electric vehicles here in Utah. So we need the vehicles, but we also, just as important, we need a convenient and affordable electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And we're going to be talking more about that later today. But it's not just private vehicles, right? It's also the entire transportation system and electrification of the whole system. So think we're here at UTA vehicles, right? Clean burning electric buses that are fast charging, the rail network, increasing electrification of the rail network, and then all of our public fleets. So think state vehicles, county, city that are all over our communities, the freight system, semis, delivery service vehicles that are increasingly being used in our new economy, locomotive engines, airplanes even, the whole transportation system. And it's not just the vehicles, right? It's also, of course, the infrastructure for power generation, hopefully and increasingly renewable power sources, and how we transmit it and how we store it, right? So you get the point that there's so many components to the transportation system that we have to consider. So how do we get there? How are we going to do this? Well, here's the great news. You all, in this room, we have tremendous expertise, and we're going to be having more people join us as we go through the day. But in my view, the key to this is collaboration. Working together to accomplish goals that are larger than any of us can accomplish individually. And in Utah, we have a really strong track record of such collaboration. In fact, sometimes people refer to it as Utah's secret sauce. One example is the Wasatch Choice Vision, our shared vision on the Wasatch Front for growth and development. In transportation, we have Utah's Unified Transportation Plan. It's a national model. We were the first state in the entire country to bring together all of the transportation agencies to plan for the future of transportation, identify what the priorities are, and then work together. And electrification can and must be a component of that unified plan. So with this collaboration, I am confident that we can do this. We can plan for transportation system electrification. We have the right parties together. You are the right people to make this happen in Utah. And I also know that we have to do this, because the decisions that we make together today and in the weeks and months and years to come are going to influence our quality of life here, for us, for our children, and for generations to come. So let's do this together, okay? With that, I'm very happy to turn it over to our lead MC for the day, my friend and colleague, Jay Fox, the Executive Director of UTA.
I'm always so much comfortable when I'm actually be able to walk around. So, and George, please, Jay Fox, please.
And now, Jay Fox, Executive Director of UTA.
Beautiful, thank you. George, we had a town hall yesterday here at UTA, and George is our MC for that. And it's just wonderful. You missed your calling, George. You should have been radio. So thank you very much. I just got the sign that I need to stay in the middle of this area. Thank you for coming to UTA today, and thank you for being part of what I think will be a wonderful day for everyone. I wanted to start off with actually giving you the history of how this happened. Hal Johnson, who many of you know, who works here at UTA and is our manager for research and development, and has just been, I'm going to talk you up a little bit, so we'll get there. He and I were over at Rocky Mountain Power to talk about infrastructure rollout for our electric fleet. And when we were over there, the question I had was, how does this infrastructure fit into the planning for the region? And when we got our answer, I realized, and Hal realized too, that we didn't really have a master plan for electrification for our region. And I'm big on, and I talk about this a lot here at UTA, that on one UTA, that we act together all the time in this agency as one. And that translates into community and to regional efforts and to statewide efforts. And so from that moment, from when we walked out of that door, we laid, we had the seed that has turned into who I call the sapling today, which is all of us gathering together and talking about how we plan for electrification, how we leverage off of one another for electrification. Because the last thing we ever want to do is be redundant. The last thing we ever want to do is spend money twice, because it's so valuable and so important that we act in concert. Every day, and I went online yesterday and just grabbed stats that I actually knew were there, but I just wanted to get the exact numbers. For me, part of what I'm talking about right now with you is the how. How do we move forward? The why, to me, is assumed. Why electrification is assumed. And that's because of these numbers. The sun brings us 170,000 terawatts of energy every single moment of every single day. The wind, our annual continental U.S. wind potential is 68,000 terawatts, 18 times the annual U.S. electricity consumption. The water, if harnessed, the energy produced by the Earth's oceans, thermal, osmotic, and waves is estimated at a minimum to be 20,000 terawatts annually, more than enough to power the entire world. That's the why, and to me, that's self-evident. We don't have to actually dig anything up to generate everything that we need here in this in this region, in this country. It is right there, and that transmission of kinetic natural energy into an electrification for this region will produce, not only for this generation, for many, many generations beyond, the kind of air quality we want, the type of quality of life that we all want, and a future that is incredibly bright. Many government entities and individuals are doing great work around this. And so for me, the how turns into what I'd like to see at the end of today, a plan going forward for a master electrified transportation master plan, a master plan for electrification. So, and that be a regional plan, a plan that we all can commit to and all can build out on. I want to thank some folks before we kick it off. First, I do want to thank our trustees at UTA. So Carlton, Jeff, Beth, you will find no more, you'll find three, these are like, how do I phrase this? You guys are the best. How about that? They are committed 100% to supporting transportation, public transportation in this community, and to innovating around it. We just finished our budget workshops, and that was the theme around it. How do we get better? How do we do better? How do we build out on this vision? I want to thank the communications team. You are in the basement of our frontline headquarters, and it no longer looks like a basement. They did a wonderful job setting up today. Eric's going to do a great job making sure I stay in camera. Thank you to Steve Wright and Andrea and just the entire team here at UTA for making this possible. Thank you to our speakers and moderators in advance. They're probably individually, used to being introduced and thanked individually, but there's so many that we have here today that I can't even begin to do that right now. And finally, I do want to thank Hal Johnson. Hal took that seed that we had when we walked out of Rocky Mountain Power and turned it into today. And so this deserves a round of applause. So thank you, Hal. And so I'm going to bring a moment up to set the table. Today, let's just rejoice in planning for our future. You're going to see it demonstrated outside. We have one of our new Gillig electric vehicles out front. You'll see it if you take the tour of our Depot District building, which is committed to a sustainable transportation network and was built with that in mind. And thank you for being here, and thank you for being part of this. I look forward to putting the action around this concept and building out on a plan for our entire region. So with that, Hal, we want to come up and help set the table for today. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm so glad to be here, and thank you all for coming out to our Electrification Forum. I really liked what Andrew said about the secret sauce in Utah's collaboration. I've been working in the transportation business for almost 30 years now, and that's always been the magic, is really the collaboration between the agencies, between UDOT, between UTA, our partnership with Rocky Mountain Power, partnership with our local government partners. So we're very fortunate to have such a great climate to work within in Utah, as well as our partnerships with our nonprofits. So for our first session here, we've got 4 presenters. First, we'll have a short video presentation from Mayor Mendenhall. She wasn't able to be here in person, but she recorded a great 4-minute video that does us a good job in kind of talking about why on electrification. And then we have Laura Hanson, our great friend from the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. So we're really excited to hear from Laura. And Regan Zane is going to talk about the great things that are happening at Utah State and Aspire, and kind of how this is coming towards electrification ecosystem. And then we have Commissioner Todd, who's said he's 5 days in his job. So we're very pleased to have you here. And so we'll bring you up and we'll start our first panel. So come on up.
Hello, and thank you for the chance to participate in this electrification summit, albeit remotely. Salt Lake City takes its role as Utah's capital city seriously, and we're leading out on electrification for our buildings and our vehicles, both municipally and community-wide. As our grid becomes cleaner through increasing developments in renewable energy, powering our homes, buildings, and vehicles with electricity is one of the surest ways to reduce overall carbon emissions and improve air quality. Salt Lake City is working across many fronts to reduce air pollution and act on the climate. In 2016 and again in 2019, the city established goals of powering our entire community with net 100% renewable electricity by no later than 2030. We're also working to power our municipal operations with nearly 100% renewable energy in the next few years. Just last year, we broke ground on the Electron Solar Project in nearby Tooele County. It will generate 80 megawatts of clean solar energy to achieve that goal. Earlier this year, our RDA adopted a sustainable development policy, and it states that all new RDA-funded construction projects must be 100% electric, meaning no natural gas or propane, and they must have an Energy Star score of 90 or better, meaning they perform among the top 10% of buildings nationwide. This is a big deal because buildings are one of the most significant sources of local air pollution, and Salt Lake City's RDA will now be supporting emission-free development. When it comes to transportation, we're also on the right track. My administration worked with the City Council to pass an electrified transportation resolution right out of the gate in December of 2020. That establishes some ambitious electrified transportation goals for Salt Lake City. And last year, we began working toward the goals of purchasing more plug-in vehicles for our internal fleet on an accelerated timeline. Our fleet already includes 71 all-electric vehicles, everything from the compliance cars you see around town to the fire department sedans to the airport's ground vehicles. Where practical, our goal is to have the majority of our sedan purchases be plug-in options by next year, with sport utility vehicles and pickup trucks following right after. I'm also very excited to see that our airport is purchasing 6 of those very cool all-electric Ford F-150 Lightnings coming to market, and our Public Services Department is purchasing 1 Lightning in the next year. Salt Lake City is also investing in public electric vehicle charging. We want to make it easier for those who live, work, and play in the capital city to do their part in reducing emissions by driving and easily charging an electric vehicle. To that end, we've installed 20 level 2 public charging ports across the city that are free to use for the duration of the posted parking time. And our airport has installed even more charging ports for its customers and employees. But we need to do even more to make it more convenient for people to charge their cars. This year, I'm preparing to transmit to our city council an updated ordinance that would require all new multifamily units to make at least 20% of their on-site parking EV ready. That means that these residences will install the electric conduit necessary to serve the charging needs of their residents into the future. These are a few of the ways that Salt Lake City is prioritizing electric vehicles and buildings, and with them, clean air and carbon reduction. This needs to go beyond our city and our own boundaries, though. We need plentiful, fast charging infrastructure on highways across the state and the region.
And I did want to thank Jay for his kind words. I really appreciate what he said, and appreciate Jay's leadership in helping bring this together. I did forget to mention that there's restrooms upstairs, so if you go out the stairs here or up the elevator, we've got restrooms upstairs, so there's nothing on this floor, so just so you're aware. Sorry. So we'll bring up Laura and Commissioner Todd and Regan. Come on up and we'll get started on this panel.
I'm Director Greg Todd. As was mentioned, I'm on day 5 as the Director of the Office of Energy Development and also the Governor's advisor. Let me give you a real fast perspective. Monday I came in, Tuesday and Wednesday was the legislature at interim. Wednesday night, I was at the University of Utah Energy Geoscience Institute 50th anniversary. Thursday morning, I was with Congressman Stewart on a podcast about geothermal. Yesterday, all day, I was at UIMA, which is the Utah Advanced Materials and Manufacturing Initiative. And today I'm here. And it feels like there's, I'm trying to pull the hose out of my throat here. Laura came to me and says, you know, I'm presenting, would you like to participate? And I felt it was appropriate, and I'm glad she did. Here is our works. So as the director of OED, it's our mission to advance the Utah's energy and minerals economics for the provision of affordable, reliable, and sustainable outcomes that provide significant and lasting value to the state. The Governor, Cox, also made a commitment to include the Rural Matters section. And as Tom Carter, who was the director before, he and many others came up with a plan. They went throughout Utah. They went to 20 counties. There were 3 open houses. There was a targeted stakeholder interview, and there was a creation of a technical committee and a creation of a policy committee. And with that, we came up with the Energy and Innovation Plan. And this is our perspective. Affordability, reliability, and sustainability are priorities for these energy-related, in this energy-related work. And as this group went throughout all of Utah, I actually had the opportunity to participate in Vernal. And Laura found me a picture of me, and I'm talking to Senator Winterton, and Tom Carter is right behind there. So as a commissioner, I was commissioner of Duchesne County when this came about. But I'm appreciative of being able to be here and being part of this perspective. And now Laura will have some conversations about the plan and about some of the things that are going on there.
Thanks so much, Commissioner. It's great to have you here, and welcome to the state of Utah in your new position. I'm a little disappointed I didn't get George's voice of God introducing us, but we'll just go with it. Maybe he can do it for me later. So as the Commissioner mentioned, now Director of the Office of Energy Development mentioned, my job was to kind of help facilitate the development of this new energy and innovation plan. We did a whole bunch of tours and visits around the state and visited with a bunch of key stakeholders throughout the state to get their feedback on what should be incorporated into this. The plan structure is an internet-based web-based document. The idea here is that it's very dynamic. We can continue to update it as new information comes forth, and it's not a static document that sits on the shelf. It's really organized around three kind of component chunks. The first is a series of commitments, and this is really the meat of the plan. Then there is a section that kind of describes Utah's energy resources, and then we talk about energy in context of Utah issues. So energy in the environment, energy in the economy, energy in public lands, and how those various different things work with one another. So these commitments, so this is really kind of, as I mentioned, the meat of the plan. Rather than focusing on specific goals and recommendations, this plan really lays out a series of actions. It's not really laying out a series of actions the state's going to take, but rather a series of commitments. This is establishing the policy guidance through which the Office of Energy Development's work will work. And so these are really the core of the energy plan. So the first, if I can click gently, okay, there we go. The first commitment is that Utah is committed to any of the above strategy. And so what we mean by this here is that coal, oil, natural gas, solar, wind, geothermal, we are supportive of any of the above strategy to advance Utah's future and make sure that we're really being responsible citizens. The next commitment is that we're committed to America's energy independence. We put this plan together right as the war in Ukraine and Russia broke out. And so all of a sudden we started thinking, boy, we have a little different situation here. We really need to be focusing on our own energy independence. This one here, yeah, so we're focused on pragmatic, market-driven climate solutions that enable energy production. And so in this space, we're really, we're experiencing a drought in Utah. A lot of that is attributed to climate change. The governor's been very outspoken about that. Some states are approaching this with a very heavy-handed way, coming down with regulations or executive orders, like California saying that they're not going to have any more internal combustion engines sold in their state. Utah is taking a little bit different approach, which is to foster the environment in which the market can drive these innovations and these changes. At the same time, we're really focused on innovation. The commissioner was just down at UAMI, and they visited the San Rafael Energy Innovation Center in southern Utah, which is a great example of some of this. These are some pictures of some equipment that they're using for molten salt reactor research, which I do not even know what that means, but it's a really amazing innovation that's happening here in the state of Utah. We're also committed to supporting our rural communities, the Uinta Basin, where the commissioner is from, Carbon County. There's lots of other places where the entire economy is really structured around an extractive and energy industry. This often results in boom-bust cycles, which are challenging for those communities. And further, Rocky Mountain Power's long-term plans show closing of several coal-fired power plants in the state of Utah, which is a big hit to the economy of those rural communities. And so the state's really committed to supporting all rural communities around the state in diversifying their economies, making sure that they have the ability to sustain themselves and weather changes that may happen in the energy space. And we are focused on a commitment to mining and technology and improvements in air quality. As a transition to more electric-based energy futures, it's going to require more critical minerals, copper, lithium, nickel, cobalt, rare earth elements. These are all components of batteries and solar panels. And Utah has some robust mineral resources that can support these technologies. And so we need to work with partners on that. And then the last commitment is just collaboration. We promise to work with local governments, with energy providers, with nonprofit organizations, with industry associations to make sure that we're making the very best decisions for our community. And I have a whole bunch of other slides, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to zip through them, and perhaps we can make these available to you all afterwards. I think, I want to focus on this one here for just a minute. So in terms of energy and public lands, one of the things that's really critical to our transition to more electrification in our state is going to mean that we need more transmission lines. A lot of power production is going to happen in southern Utah. Most of the population is here along the Wasatch Front, and so we're going to need more transmission lines crossing our state to be able to deliver that power to where we're going to be using it the most. A lot of our land in Utah is federal land, and so this will require collaborations with the federal government to get these new transmission lines in place. And there was an electric transmission study that was completed in 2021. You can go and access that from the energy plan online, but that kind of outlines what we're doing there. And then I'm just going to zip through, and I'm going to leave it here with Commissioner Todd to wrap us up about what's next for the Office of Energy Development. Thank you.
Isn't Laura great? I mean, I've interacted with her a little bit. We were actually on the CIB board together for a little bit, and that's where I got to understand a little bit more. And she was able to go on several of those interactions throughout the state. We are any of the above. We're working with hydrogen, we're working with geothermal, we're working with the solar transmissions. I'll be in Tempe next week with the transmission lines. That is a big concern. I just want to bring that up, that there's a lot of things ahead of us. We're looking forward to interacting with all. UTA is a great opportunity to make some great strides here in this area. And in perspective, I don't know of many electric cars in Duchesne County right now. So there's a way to progress and move forward, and we'll turn the time over to Reagan.
Okay, that's great, thank you. I think I got the warning, this is sensitive?
Yes, very carefully tap it.
All right, great. I think I too will come out here just so that I can see the slides a little bit easier as we progress. So my name is Regan Zane. For those that I haven't met yet, I'm the Center Director for the Aspire Research Center at Utah State University. We're focused on all things electrification, but particularly transportation electrification, and a significant emphasis on that infrastructure required to make a cost-effective solution for electrifying our transportation systems. All right, so I hope we don't seem like a broken record, but I think Hal did this on purpose. I think we're looking to bring us all onto this same page of the need to work together and come up with a combined solution across programs. And so I'm going to provide a few more remarks, very much continuing on what Andrew and Jay have already stated, with an emphasis on the need for, and really the opportunity looking forward, for a cross-agency coordinated multimodal electrification plan. And this type of a plan includes both the Unified Transportation Plan, so got to be synchronized, tied in with transportation, but it's also aligned with the Energy Plan, and also needs to be tied in with our State Economic Development Plan, and also with our Workforce Development Plans. All of these need to be synchronized to have electrification roll forward the way we'd like to see it. All right, so, you believe me?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. But for those that don't, let's hit just a couple more. All right, first, as was already stated, the why really should be inherent. I believe we have a common vision. We're looking for a brighter, we're looking for a better future. That would include improved air quality for our region, and as we all know, this is critical for this area. We're also looking for reducing cost for moving people and goods, and that includes reducing cost for public transit. And we're looking for this economic development that will bring us new, good jobs, and that's going to require new training in this area. All right, but as we also know, there are challenges moving forward with electrification. These challenges in many cases are tied into the cost of the vehicles as well as the cost of the infrastructure. And what we've certainly learned over the past decade is going it alone is an expensive venture. And tying right into what Laura had commented previously as well, approaching this with a common coordinated approach can actually lead to a cost-effective solution driven by the market rather than driving this by regulation at any cost. All right, so let's consider how we can do this in a cost-effective way. I'm going to use one example that's driven right out of projects that we're running with Rocky Mountain Power, with UTA, right here in this region. We'll build this example around the TRAX line. All right, so we have the TRAX line. This is a very good solution for electric transit in the city, in the urban region. We have this running here in Salt Lake City. It's all electric, requires no batteries, relatively cost-effective for the vehicle itself. Receives power from overhead lines continuously as it operates. These are powered by what are called traction power stations. The traction power stations sequentially power the vehicle as it goes through the city. And at each station, as a vehicle comes through, that power transitions to it, and the majority of the power is required when you get the vehicle going. So launching this vehicle after each stop, that's when you get the majority of the power draw and demand. Okay, simple enough, but this does have a downside. By having high peak power required as you launch the vehicle, you end up with high peak power with relatively low average power. What this means is the utility and the rest of the infrastructure, all the lines that were put in, the distribution system, including the substation, the transmission, the distribution lines, as well as ultimately the power feeding these stations. We have the track center over here on the left. Over here on the right is an example of the current or the power that is transmitted from one of those substations. It goes to a really high peak each time it launches a vehicle. Gets a bit of a negative peak when the vehicle comes to a stop, and then it's relatively low in between. This actually turns into relatively expensive infrastructure because it's fairly poorly utilized. Okay, that's because we don't use it that often. Every 15, 30 minutes you get a train that comes through, high peak power. This makes the electricity relatively expensive, and it also makes the infrastructure to support that electricity relatively expensive. But we found that not, of course, the downside, this is a high power pulse load, but it's also on the convenience side a relatively predictable load. So that led to a discussion, really led by Rocky Mountain Power in partnership with UTA and bringing in Utah State University as a research partner into what was called as the Intermodal Hub Project. This ran a couple of years ago and has successfully demonstrated this concept of, okay, well now can we take then these high power predictable loads and combine them with additional loads, and can we do this in a coordinated, managed way that brings the cost of electricity and the infrastructure down for everyone? But this needs to be more than just the trains, because it'd be great if we just had lots of trains running continuously, but that's not going to be the practical case. But we can combine them with others. So let's take that TRAX line, let's bring it into where we ran the Intermodal Hub Project as a first case pilot. That was here at Central Station in Salt Lake City, so the Intermodal Hub facility. Not only does it include the TRAX line, but this also includes now a transition to electric buses. And we need to charge those buses. And there's, again, high power cost when you charge the bus during the day with a high power overhead charger. And then you also have charging at the bus depot. And we knew there was a plan for the expansion, which you're now here to see actually happening today. So with that expansion towards electric, we said, okay, well, let's consider this. Let's combine the peak power loading we had from the TRAX line together with the overhead lines for charging throughout the day of the buses, which would decrease the amount of batteries and the cost of the buses themselves, together with depot charging, which would happen overnight, as well as buses that are not currently en route. And then let's also consider expanding that. Let's consider Ubers, Lyfts, some public charging, park and ride type opportunities. That charging could also be combined, and that could also be combined with the loading of the facility as a building itself also. This project successfully showed that indeed this was true. We could take these peak loads and fill in the gaps essentially and get a significantly better utilization of the system, and now have a more cost-effective incremental growth as you progress towards electrification. So now instead of assuming we have to have a peak demand load, which is the worst case of all loads that you add into your system, we now have a managed loading across these loads. So when we add in the additional, let's say 450 kilowatt overhead charger, instead of having to go to the utility and add a significant expense, which could be hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on your situation, now can we balance that loading until we bring the overall average demand up, sufficient to cover that cost of the utility upgrade, which now allows you to just keep expanding. So with that project, we demonstrated that by running the coordinated planning, real-time smart charge management of those loads. We can get high levels of utilization across multiple modes of transportation and bring the cost down for the entire system. So now let's take that concept and expand it out a little bit further. So let's consider now the Central Station Intermodal Hub facility that we're touring and standing around here today. We can combine that with each of the concepts that were just described. So now we can expand the power capability of this site. It becomes essentially a multi-megawatt substation to support not only the TRAX line. We can see an example of the TRAX line coming through here on the main line. We see little blue highlights where now we might expand this into local public charging. We can expand it to Ubers and Lyfts that are coming through. We can see additional buses that are now charging. That's the overall concept. Then you can also see the train coming through with the front runner line. So now let's consider, together with Stadler Rail, an additional pilot that we currently have running, electrifying, for example, front runner. So front runner could also be overhead lines powered continuously like the TRAX line, but it may be more cost effective to consider a battery electric front runner that only requires charging as it's coming into these stations. And now, for example, we can imagine a system which can dynamically control power to these different loads. So in this case, we're imagining those blue lines indicating that as the front runner comes through, power now transfers over to the high peak load, which would be front runner charging that big battery. So it might be even tens of megawatts. Charge up the battery on front runner, and then we're transitioning right back over to controlling the loads that are surrounding that region. All right, fun concept? So this smart charge management and coordination, I haven't emphasized it, but now we can also expand that out into the main road. So the UTA hubs, conveniently or inconveniently, it's inconvenient for our air quality, but convenient for this concept of electrification. Our population sits up and down I-15, and it's in a fairly narrow corridor. And so these same stations are also quite close to the interstate. They're close to urban hubs and regions. And we can imagine that same infrastructure now supporting the roads. We can expand that to this concept of electric roads for dynamic charging, but we can also be looking at high power charging. Okay, so now let's take that same concept and expand it out into a broader roadmap. So let's take out this chunk of Earth, and certainly we're going to be looking beyond the urban regions, but just starting with the main urban corridor of the Wasatch Front, from Ogden down to Provo. If you can see that down at the bottom of the slide, it's a cutaway of that region. What if we used, for example, commuter and light rail as the roadmap for electrification across this corridor? And of course, the same concept could apply for other peak load facilities and sites along that corridor. It doesn't have to just be the transit. So each of those would then become multi-megawatt substations supporting multiple modes of transportation, both movement of people and movement of goods. Now we can get fast charging of trains, trucks, buses, cars, but again, they're not going it alone. So each fleet doesn't have to run their own infrastructure, their own charging system. They don't have to individually go to the utility and negotiate, I need a new charging. But if we can instead coordinate this with a master plan, both the development of the infrastructure and smart charge management to control the loading on those systems, we can end up with an optimized system. And then finally, we can add in the charging along the highway for additional charging of roads. This infrastructure can support hydrogen generation in the off times, and it can also support minimizing the cost of the overall system. All right, so with that concept comes what Hal had mentioned before. We need to look at this as an overall ecosystem. So we certainly need to do this together. This isn't something you do going it alone from any one of the industries or any one of the fleets. But if we look at this as an overall ecosystem, this even goes beyond transportation alone. This has to include, as was previously mentioned, the overall energy system all the way to the load. So we looked at electrification life cycle. This goes all the way from the clean energy generation through to energy storage on the grid, which can include electric, battery electric, as well as hydrogen. Transmission was already mentioned as a critical component in this plan, as well as the multimodal electrification of the load. Now, also recognize this is beyond transportation. Those loads include the facilities and buildings as well. And that also needs to be aligned with then bringing in the jobs and the economic growth that could come from entire transformation of the electrification industry and the transportation industry. So new jobs, mining and materials for these components, manufacturing, construction, new technologies that are being integrated. And of course, this isn't just to support the Utah electrification. If Utah can get ahead of our neighboring states, ahead of the nation in this approach, we can be supporting all of this infrastructure, all these components and needs, not only for Utah, but our neighboring states and perhaps across the nation. All right, so I'll conclude. there's a need for a coordination across transportation, across our energy plan, across the economic development in the state, and workforce development. This includes taking a look from the consumer perspective, the technologies, the utility, as well as our transportation systems. And we look forward to the discussion on how to do this together.
Thank you. A little loud. Thank you, Regan. I really appreciate it. By the way, I just spoke with the trustees. You're our new Chief Innovation Officer. So thanks. You know, we have just a couple minutes. We're going to have a panel at 10 o'clock, but any questions at all for any of our setting the table panelists? Can't be shy about this subject. Well, I do have, Regan, if you can just talk a little bit about, maybe with Laura as well, what are we doing already around planning? I'd like to set the table that way and see where we are right now.
Well, on the overall, coordination concept and how these systems can operate together, every one of the examples I've given here are tied to pilot projects that have already been launched here in Utah, and they've been in coordination with the local utility, with Rocky Mountain Power, with Utah Transit Authority, and with multiple industry partners. And so the image I gave was a highlight of what has already been demonstrated. In fact, we wrapped that up about a year and a half ago on the Intermodal Hub project. So that's an example of early thinking on how these systems could work together. Those concepts are now being deployed at our Utah Inland Port Authority pilot. And that was really driven by the state's interest and understanding how these technologies can combine and apply to specific real-world examples here in Utah. And that really also led into our Stadler Rail pilot, looking at how this could combine with commuter heavy rail. So it's interesting to see early pilot projects already rolling out here in the state. And boy, this is tying right into discussions that are happening throughout the governor's office in each of these divisions.
If I could just add to that, so in 2008, there was a piece of legislation that was passed that asked all utilities in Utah to have at least 20% of their annual retail electric sales from renewable energy by 2025. We're getting closer to 2025, and the state's been talking about it's probably time to take another look and renew that goal and reevaluate that goal. There are 38 different states that have established statewide goals to reduce carbon emissions, including Utah, and a lot of different states have pursued those through executive orders or through legislation. And kind of our approach at Utah again is let's be collaborative in this. Let's find a solution where we can involve legislative policymakers, industry representatives, and regulators to make sure that we're on track and heading in the right way. So we're thinking at a grand scale, but it's going to take time, and I think working together is the key to make that successful.
I just want to bring up just one thing. It's called base load. That is a big thing, and it's going to have to happen. And talking to the Deseret Power and Rocky Mountain, that's one of their concerns, is having a good base load for all of this.
Reagan, question. Is this coordinated system, ecosystem that you're describing, we're doing pilots in Utah, but is it in place anywhere else in the world right now?
Well, the concept of applying smart charge management, coordinating among loads, is becoming a hot topic. So certainly it's on the minds of many. We have two large Department of Energy grants with a lot of these same partners operating here in Utah that are tied in with these pilots that were part of an overall federal level solicitation for smart charge management. But in terms of really considering how an urban region, expanding out to a whole statewide and broader region, can look at this from multimodal transportation, can combine it with electrical as well as hydrogen generation, that I have not seen. I've not seen this really put together in the context of what Utah is putting out right now. And I think it's an important point. Certainly there are components, and it won't be long, and I'm sure there are probably others that we're not aware of that are headed in this direction. But at the moment, it appears that we're ahead of the others. And there is significant federal interest in finding the solution. So putting Utah out in the lead, I believe, is an opportunity to bring federal funds into Utah and really show the nation the way from little Utah.
Thank you, Regan. We're going to take a break now. I want to thank Greg, Regan, and Laura. Please thank them for setting the table for us today, and we'll we're going to have a roundtable discussion now on Utah air quality and innovation. We have slides available, and I'll ask our panelists if you need to go to them, we can get our projector going again. But I want to spend some time just talking, allow each of the panelists to want to introduce themselves, and then talk a little bit about where air quality and innovation sits, in their work. So let me just go down. So Hal, we've met you already, but go ahead and just talk about a little bit what you do at UTA, and then we'll come down and we'll start the panel from there.
I'm Hal Johnson with UTA. I do project management, program management work. I've been working on our battery bus projects initiatives since 2017.
And Raphael?
Good morning. My name is Raphael Kühne. I'm the head of engineering of Sadler Rail, so I represent Sadler Rail today. Obviously, as you can hear, I'm not local, so I moved to Salt Lake this July to ramp up the local engineering at Sadler Rail here in Utah. So far, you have a really great and beautiful state here, so I think it's really important that we take care about this state together from an environmental perspective, so I'm glad to be part of this forum.
All right, and Michael?
Hi, everybody. My name is Michael Shea. I'm the Sustainability Director for Salt Lake County, and my job is to help Salt Lake County's internal operations become more sustainable, decrease emissions, use less water, create less waste, and then also create outside policies that affect the entire community and advise the mayor and council. I also am the project manager for the eBus Air Monitor program, which we'll be talking about in a sec.
Regan, we heard from you, but if you can talk a little bit about yourself and your history in Aspire as well.
Sure, my name is Regan Zane. I'm the Aspire Center Director here at Utah State University. I'm a professor at Utah State of Electrical Engineering. I've been at Utah State actually just for 10 years. Seems longer. But I was recruited to Utah State to develop an initiative around electrification, combining transportation with electric. We developed a research center called the Sustainable Electrified Transportation Center, or SELECT, around 2015. Then that became Aspire in 2020, which is a National Science Foundation engineering research center. It's their flagship program for large-scale research. So I'm founding director of Aspire, and really pleased to be part of this discussion.
And I'll introduce myself a little bit more. So yeah, I'm Jay Fox, Executive Director of Utah Transit Authority. My deep history is I began my career as an attorney like Andrew Gruber, and like Andrew Gruber, I've recovered from that. So I am a recovering attorney and happier for it. I worked for many years for the United States Department of Transportation, and the latter half of that I worked with Federal Transit Administration, which is the primary federal funding partner for transit in this country. And after leaving there, I worked for Amtrak. I was the senior director of host railroads. So basically, we managed all the relationships with our hosts outside of the Northeast Corridor. Amtrak runs on other people's rails, and that would be true here going through the Salt Lake City area. Amtrak runs on Union Pacific. I then went to SEPTA, which is the Philadelphia area's Transit Authority. Pre-pandemic, that's how I always phrase it, they had about 300 million customers a year and a very large system, 8 commuter rail lines in service in 3 states. And then I had the good fortune to be selected as the executive director here, and it's been an exciting 8-9 months. And I used to be counting days, but I'm way past that right now. And we, my wife and I moved out here, and we're really been embraced by the community and really excited to be here. So, Jim?
Hi, James Campbell. I'm the Director of Innovation and Sustainability at Rocky Mountain Power, and I too am a recovering engineer, not a recovering lawyer, but it's been about 10 years. No, but yeah, so I've been working on electrification for a while now. I think Regan has been my kind of partner in crime here, where we've been plotting and scheming, and Hal as well. And so I'm actually the principal investigator of 3 Department of Energy grants, about $20 million worth, that we've been able to bring into Utah to really help push some of the technology advancement and really make Utah a leader. And the technology that's coming out of Utah State University, I think the leadership that UTA has shown, when nationally, when I go back to DC and I interact with Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, one common theme does come out that in Utah we do a lot of really advanced work, and we have a great reputation. And I think a lot of it comes from the leadership with Jay and with Carlos and everybody else who kind of works in this space. So I've been very proud and excited to work on it, and excited to work more.
Good morning. Daniel Mendoza. I'm a professor in atmospheric sciences at the University of Utah. I also have joint appointments in internal medicine, pulmonary division, and city and metropolitan planning at the U. My main work has really centered around very clearly quantifying air pollution here in the Salt Lake Valley and also additional valleys, Cache Valley and also Utah Valley. My work also entails looking at what the health outcomes are. I'll show you in my slides in a little bit what my team does overall, because we do want to do a full arc where we measure air pollution, we look at the health impacts, and then quantify the economic cost of action or inaction to then develop policy that we take to the Capitol and also to Congress. And then we also look at, well, what are the solutions? What are feasible solutions? So we don't want to have a panacea of, we'll have zero emissions next year, but we want to think about what can we do to, for example, incrementally reduce emissions and then look at the overall economic cost. I've been working with Michael on the eBus project, as well as other projects that really relate to how Utah is at the forefront of measuring air pollution and looking for solutions in terms of how we can develop also equitable and inclusive communities so that all members of society are actually benefiting from any and all of these initiatives.
Lyle. Hi, my name is Lyle McMillan. I'm the Director of Strategic Investments at UDOT, and apparently I'm now also on staff at FHWA, which might be a conflict of interest, but we'll work it out. What I bring to the table here is last year I inherited and completed the PM job for DEQ VW settlement grant that UDOT received to install fast DC chargers in 8 locations across the state and 11 locations total, and then was asked to lead up a team that wrote and authored Utah's statewide electric vehicle charging network plan. That was, wow, it just seems like it was so long ago, last June. And then we just recently completed Utah's National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Plan, submitted that mid-July, and it was just approved last week. So we have a lot of work ahead of us to install fast DC chargers all across the state.
Thank you, Lyle. Thank you, panelists. I want to begin by first having each of the panelists talk a little bit about what they're doing, what their work is around both air quality and innovation on that. And for the panelists, just so you're aware, we've turned off the projector. We can certainly show any slides if you need to go to them. I'd like to make this as conversational as possible, but we have that ability. We just need about 30 seconds to power it up, and we can make that happen. But Daniel, I'd like to turn it to you first to talk about air quality in our region and talk about the challenges in that and where we're going in the future.
Yes, and I sent Hal some slides. If we could start with that, it'll be much more instructive, I think.
Okay. And Michael, I think you're part of that as well for talking.
I have a separate slide deck, but if we're trying to shorten time, I could probably just verbally go through it if
Okay.
whatever's easier.
All right, great. So Daniel, as we wait to fire it up, if you can just generally talk about where the University of Utah is in analyzing air quality.
So I think one of our roles here is to understand, we can't really solve a problem without understanding it first, without really quantifying it. I guess that comes a little bit from my scientific background. So what we really started doing, what is novel, is there are 2 projects that have certainly put Utah ahead, and really Salt Lake County ahead of any place in the country or in the world. we have two projects. One is the TRAX air quality measuring project, and then the other one is the e-bus project. So I'll let Michael talk about the latter. But we started back in 2015, the TRAX air quality monitoring project, where we placed air quality sensors on top of two, and then we added a third TRAX train in 2018. So with that, now we can start to measure pollution across the valley. So not just necessarily at stationary locations, but with that, we have repeatability and we have measurements across the valley, which is a really great asset. And once we get the slides up, you'll be able to see.
We're good.
Okay.
Great. Wanna come on up?
Yeah. So I always like to start with thanking our team, and it's actually quite critical that you take a look at some of the specialties that they have. We work with sociologists, political scientists, other specialists in medicine, as well as atmospheric scientists and epidemiologists. So we really want to encompass almost a cradle-to-grave approach, if you will, of measuring air pollution to developing enactable policy. So one thing, forgot how sensitive this thing was. One thing I always want to point out is we have air pollution problems. That is an air purifier in my home, and it takes about 3 months for it to go from there, from the top to the bottom images. Now, of course, with my background, I would be remiss if I did not pick one of the cleanest spots in the city to live, so that's where I actually purchased my home. So this is a clean home that I've also retrofitted, and on top of that, this is my air purifier. So I always want to bring attention to that because not all community members can be as fortunate as finding a spot that's fairly clean, retrofitting it, and in addition have these purifiers. This is ending up in your lungs and everyone's lungs, and potentially much worse. This is 3 months. So, as I mentioned, developing the equitable, inclusive environment. So I want to first take a look at what are we measuring, looking at the health impacts, what is the economic cost of action or inaction to develop policy, and then further urban development. So what do we want to do, and how do we explore the full cycle, and all under the lens of equity. So making sure that our most vulnerable populations, those who may not even know that air pollution or any other kind of pollution is a problem, are taken care of. Because again, just as in many forums that I see, I do not recognize many faces from their community outside of really the group that generally makes a decision. So that's something to really think about. We have very clear delineation of social demographics here in Salt Lake County. It's very clear that not only is the west side, primarily northwest side, more socioeconomically challenged, they also hold a majority of blue-collar work, and they also have a larger racial composition. So one of the papers that I discussed with Hal about presenting was looking at the impact of UTA on air quality, because again, we need to make sure that we understand what it is right now that we're seeing, to then see how can we improve it. So this was actually funded by UTA, by the UTRAC fund. And so what we did was we looked at what is the impact across the entire region in terms of emissions and also reduced travel. So we also ran some models to see what happens if we electrify part of the fleet, and then if we improve the fleet in terms of cleaner diesel as well as natural gas, and the results are staggering. I won't go into detail, but the manuscript is there if you're interested. So there are definitely significant benefits. And why is that important? Because again, specifically buses, for example, end up going to residential areas. So we don't want to pollute those areas. Those are where people live, people sleep. Then the opposite idea was seeing what is the impact of air quality on transit ridership, and what we found out was that media actually helps. Meaning when there were notices, for example, it's a red air quality day, consider commuting, ridership increases. This is again using the EFC, the tap on, tap off data. Some of the additional work that we want to do is taking a look at what happens during yellow and orange air quality days. We understand that people just see that it's kind of murky outside, they may not want to be exposed, but they are now given the guilt of it's a red air quality day, you now have to do something about it. So now what can we do with a very detailed picture of what goes on in terms of air quality? Well, 2019, right before the year before the pandemic, we had fireworks, and those were at Jordan Park on the west side, and you can really see what I call the pollution blister really grow into the community. The last slide does show some of the cleanup, and that's just cold air coming down from the canyon. That's Emigration Canyon. It's cleaning up, again, the east side, but the west side is just stuck with this pollution blister that doesn't go away until about noon or 2 p.m. The following day. This is the whole county, same event, but I just wanted to highlight Salt Lake City for a minute. But here we can see all the firework events across the different cities, and we see the hotspots as they grow. Well, I always, I know that those images were great, but I always ask people, well, where do you spend the majority of your time? And 90% of the time you spend inside. So we want to be looking at what happens inside during just regular periods of time, as well as during wildfires, which have become a larger concern, as well as fireworks events as well. And why do we do all this? Well, one of the most poignant things that we can see are the impacts on educational outcomes. Our team has shown that following poor air quality events and also during chronic air quality events, meaning communities that are constantly battered by poor air quality, third grade standardized test results are lower. We also see a higher rate of absenteeism, which we have then quantified in terms of the economic cost. Whenever there are absences, for example, and this was done in the Salt Lake City School District in 2019, UTA invests $40 a day per student on average. So that means that those $40 are not being spent towards educating a student, so that's wasted money. The average wage back then was $23 an hour. So if a family member, a parent, has to stay home, they're losing $200 of income that day. In addition to that, they now have to feed the child, because about 70% of students depend on free or reduced meals that they get at the schools. And then lastly, we have the economic multiplier. Economic multiplier just basically says that in general, for every dollar that you earn, there's a greater impact. $2.50 moves around the economy. It's a good example is, let's say you need to get some work done in your home, $10,000, you hire someone, that person might only get about $4,000 of that salary as a salary, because the rest goes into materials, transportation, taxes, etc. So the whole economy is suffering to the tune of nearly $500,000. That led to Representative Mark Wheatley passing a bill that now every school in Utah has emergency asthma inhalers, because this, of course, was looking at full-day absences, but part-day absences happen very often. Kids go out during a poor quality period, either wildfires, for example, or more likely inversions. They come back after recess, they have an asthma attack, and now they either have to go home or they're taken to a hospital, thus losing a partial day of school. After this, well, that initiative started in 2020, of course, we had the pandemic, but now we're starting to gather data from the nurse's office to see how much of an impact this is. And so far, as my work with the Utah Department of Health, the Asthma Task Force, I'm one of the board members there. We've been looking at data, and it's very encouraging that kids now can actually take an asthma inhaler and not have to miss school after having an asthma attack following going out and being exposed during recess. So that's actually very important, also in terms of equity, because many parents may not be able to afford medication for their kids, and this may be the only line of defense they have in terms of respiratory outcomes. And I'm assuming many of you may be familiar with this manuscript, which looked at the economic impacts of air pollution in Utah, significant losses in terms of tourism, in terms of health outcomes, worker productivity, worker retention. We're now working with multiple chambers of commerce to really understand what is the loss in terms of brain drain of someone who comes from the outside. They get exposed to inversions or to wildfires, and they say, look, I gotta go somewhere else. So those are significant economic costs, and we do know that economic outcomes do tend to drive policymaking. So that's really a compilation in as short a time as I could of the work that I'm doing. Lots of collaborators and contributors, and I'll hand it over to Michael.
All right. So I'm Michael Shea, I'm City Building Director for Salt Lake County. So I'm here to talk about our electric bus air quality monitoring program. It's fairly it's fairly straightforward. It's exactly as it sounds. We're basically placing air quality monitors on electric buses. And this is, of course, only possible because electric buses do not have any emissions. And the benefits of this are much more accurate data gathering. Right now, when we see air quality forecasts, this is done on a county-wide basis, whether we're green, yellow, or red. We, of course, know that pollution levels are much more localized than that and often affect at-risk communities at a far greater rate than more affluent communities. And so this will hopefully allow us to see on a much more detailed level where those pollution hotspots are. And that'll allow us to have more focused policy initiatives. And so instead of having a snowblower exchange program or a lawnmower exchange program, spread out over the entire Wasatch Front, we could potentially concentrate in specific communities to try to get greater emission reductions for the communities that need it most. And to Daniel's point, have a much greater understanding of the health effects, because all of those effects that he was, all those health issues that he was talking about happen at a much greater level for communities that have much higher levels of pollution. And so we have a great project work group that consists of Salt Lake County, the Division of Air Quality, UTA, Salt Lake City, University of Utah, and the nonprofit Heal Utah. So the project history is the project's now about two and a half years old. We started with 3 electric buses that UTA has been operating in Salt Lake County. And the goal was to place 3 different types of air monitor sensors on them, PM2.5, ozone, and NOx. And thanks to the help of a lot of startup funders, including Rocky Mountain Power, thank you, James, we were able to get the project started and really consider it a pilot project. We needed to make sure that the technology worked. Can you actually put the monitors on the buses themselves? Can you collect usable data? And can that data be analyzed and utilized to change policy and help publish research papers and eventually help affect people's lives? And so that has indeed been the case. We've had the buses running, all 3 buses running for about 8 months now, primarily on 2 routes. Route 2, which runs up 4th South and goes up to the University of Utah, and Route 509, which kind of takes a bunch of turns, but goes kind of through Salt Lake City, west side Salt Lake City, and eventually into West Valley. The goal being to be able to kind of measure the differences between the east side of the valley and the west side of the valley, which again, as Daniel showed, there's major discrepancies in income and population and ethnic makeup. And so we really wanted to dive into what that looked like. And so these are, Daniel's gonna be mad at me for sharing this. This is kind of what the raw data looks like from the monitors. And you can kind of see the individual spikes between each reading, and that's really when the buses pass through a roadway, a busy roadway. And obviously the busier the roadway or even a freeway, the bigger the spike in the readings. And so the long-term goal will be to kind of level this data out and eventually be able to create kind of heat maps that we can begin looking at different pollution hotspots. And so the project is, the pilot has been, we've designated it a successful project, and so now we're ready to move into phase 2. Phase 2, UTA is going to be getting 22 new electric buses starting at the beginning of next year. The goal is to place air monitor systems on all 22. And so as those buses, as those buses come online and UTA's charging infrastructure expands, we can begin spreading these monitors throughout the valley. And so instead of just having readings in the Salt Lake area, we will be able to have a complete picture of the entire county. And part of that's going to we'll create one of the most detailed pollution mapping systems in the world. And we've actually really invested in community outreach. Heal Utah has actually taken the lead we're going to be going door to door in West Side communities to specifically talk about air quality issues and talk about this program because it is a population that isn't normally exposed to air quality messaging as opposed to other populations. And so we really want to make sure there's a big environmental justice component of this. And then finally, the goal is to have a publicly available website where people can go and look at their current levels of air quality. They'll be able to see the individual buses traveling through their neighborhoods, but we'll also be able to look at kind of long-term, over months or years, what does their air quality data look like? And the end goal is to kind of have that. This isn't Salt Lake City or Salt Lake County, but this is kind of an example of what we're trying to do, is be able to figure out, where in the valley are these pollution hotspots, which neighborhoods are they affecting the most, and how can we mitigate them as best as possible. And this is really a first of its kind project. That it really hasn't been done anywhere in the country or even the world. And so if everything works out and it comes to full fruition, we really will have one of the most detailed pollution mapping systems on the planet at a relatively affordable cost because we're utilizing a system that is already in place, an infrastructure that's already in place. So that's the project. I'm sure we'll be talking more about it, but yes. Question? Was there a question? Oh, yes, Representative.
I didn't know if this was a point to ask questions, so I was trying to be subtle.
Well,
We
it
can
is
always,
now.
we can always take questions.
So we're talking about Salt Lake Valley. I'm just wondering, because I know so much of the state looks at Salt Lake Valley, but partly with, yeah, that's all about Salt Lake Valley. What about the rest of the state? So are there any projected plans to do similar projects in other places, particularly other kind of high density, like Utah Valley and even Washington?
Yeah, no, there are definitely plans. I mean, right now we are sort of just scrambling to get the initial infrastructure in place. But yeah, there are definitely plans to expand as UTA expands its e-bus fleet to expand the monitoring program. And ideally, in the end, we'd love to be able to have, the entire Wasatch Front covered, or at least and even the non-attainment areas, which include, Tooele and Cache County.
So even on that note, part of what I think is that those places have a responsibility to develop partnerships to bring to UTA and the state level. So there's a responsibility as well as an interest side.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I think as the program begins to grow and really kind of hit the level, get towards the end goal of having multiple buses and the full-time website, I think we'll begin kind of outreach to different communities and see if there's interest in expanding it into theirs.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I wanted to share something personal for me too on air quality, and that in March of 2020, when the pandemic first hit, I really got a nasty first case of COVID before anybody really knew what it was. I remember sitting in my room thinking, "Is this my last week here on Earth?" And it was a really difficult time. What my residual from that though is just I think a long-term issue, or just around breathing. I've noticed that I'm much more sensitive, and my whole point is that in moving to this area, air quality has become very, very evident to me. I've noticed it right away, and so I appreciate Daniel and Michael sharing, and this is really where we're going with this entire discussion, which is how do we solve that problem? I'd rather not be a monitor myself. I'd like to get out of that business. So James, why don't we turn to you next and have you talk a little about
I don't
that.
need to do the slides. We'll keep. I think you want to do it. I think we're running out of time now, so we can do more conversation.
Okay, great.
I will just make a statement, I guess, and then if you have any questions, because I think also you all probably have some questions. So we're at Rocky Mountain Power. We're doing a pretty big infrastructure program right now. It's a $50 million program that we got approved by our commission. We did have some legislative statutory guidance to direct the Public Service Commission to allow us to really get into this space to offer up and put in the necessary infrastructure. So that's launched this year. You're going to probably start seeing the first big stations coming in. Construction will start by the end of the year, I would say, and probably by spring will be the first ones throughout the state. And these are going to be pretty big stations. We'll have 150 kilowatt, 350 kilowatt chargers. The importance of that, a 350 kilowatt charger means you can get a charge for 100 miles in 5 minutes. So it's a pretty big, a big kind of shift away from the traditional charging technology. But we're also doing quite a bit, obviously working with Utah State University, the University of Utah, I see Masood out there, and along with, and Kyle too, Lyle, with the work he's doing, we're trying to figure out how do we really enhance the infrastructure in the state, but also to think about what's the long term going to be. These chargers that we're rolling out right now, it's a bridge, it's a transition. I think the gas station model, which is what we're following right now, is not the right model. We're going to go away from that. As technology develops, and I think Regan, as he was showing, our vision is what we want to do is use this kind of backbone of an infrastructure, and then from there we can allow all this other infrastructure and charging capability. And what that does, and then how we manage the flow of that power, means we can do it so cheap. It really will be transformative to where now, instead of, right, you go to a gas station when you want to get fuel when you're low and you kind of go out to it, the fuel is always there for you. It's at where you start and where you end. And then if you need something in the building where you start from and the building where you end. And if you need it along the way, now we can put in this really optimized system. And especially as we're starting to talk about like autonomous vehicles, we really have this opportunity to manage it where like, hey, the sun is shining, we have excess solar production. Now what we can do is send signals out to these cars and say, hey, come and fill up because now's the right time. Or what we say is, hey, we have a little burden right now, so let's be a little more efficient and maybe not charge right now if you don't have to. So what we can do is those are going to be the technologies and those are going to be the scenarios as we move forward. And really to get there, we're going to need to have, kept with the theme of the collaboration between all of us to really make that a reality. But so
yeah,
that's my statement of the future.
Yeah, and I'll ask the first question and I'll open it up to everyone here. Generation. You know, where is Rocky Mountain? Where are you guys at in generation? And you know, what's the future? I mean, I talked a lot about what the sun delivers us every day.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
where we are with wind and with.
Yeah. So we go through as a regulated utility, we go through a process that's called an integrated resource plan. This is a long-range planning process. It looks out for 20 years. And so our most recent IRP, we're basically calling for the reduction of our emissions from our generation fleet, that by 2030 we'll have a 75% reduction in emissions. And how we're going to achieve, so that's just in 8 years. So how we're going to achieve that is we're looking at massive construction of wind and solar right now. That's going on right now. I mean, in our office, there's teams that are out there working. You don't really see it because most of that generation is happening out in some of the rural areas. But it is enormous that's going on. And so by 2030, we will be 75% lower in our emissions. By 2050, we will be this kind of, you know, net zero. We will be, our plan is to be there. Now, there's a couple of big things that have to happen, and I think the good commissioner mentioned it earlier. Baseload is a dynamic. We have these kind of two challenging dynamics. One, we have to get to zero emissions. Society has pretty much said that. This has to happen. And even independent of whatever local and even US kind of politics, globally, the financial systems have pretty much required. So if you're going to participate in the debt or equity markets, you got to have a plan to have net zero emitting. That's just a reality. And so that's happening. So we have this dynamic where we have to get to zero emissions, and then we also have this dynamic of electrification that's happening, where now our loads are increasing potentially. And transportation is significant. I mean, we're also going to see the increase in how we heat space and water, so buildings, heat pumps, and that sort of thing. That's going to happen. Those are kind of modest growth. The big growth is transportation. So we have this dynamic of get to zero emissions and, by the way, provide more power. And so it's going to take a lot of renewables, which we're doing, but that's not going to be it. We're going to have to find other technologies. Right now, in our map, really the only thing that we can count on, because the prime directive, I don't know if anybody's a Star Trek fan, but it's the prime directive of a utility is keep the lights on, right? That's the number one thing, keep the lights on. And so right now, we can only move with what we know works. And so right now, nuclear is really the only zero emitting technology that can ensure the base load, combined with the I mean, we're doing massive amounts of renewables, doing massive amounts of storage as well. We have an RFP out now for battery storage as well. We're looking at pumped hydro storage, which is pretty new technologies there. So we're looking at all of these things, but I think really to get to that 2050 date of zero, we're going to probably have to have nuclear as part of that mix.
All right, well, I will say that all the Star Trek fans, I think, are in the center of town right now. There's a convention going on right now. And you will see them on Frontrunner wandering in around 4 or 5 o'clock. All of a sudden becomes a superhero convention. So I want to turn on from that to rollouts of electrifying the fleet, and I think Lyle and Al, you can pick up the ball from here, and let's just talk about how we move from generation to a fleet that and that's both commercial and household. Where are we going with electric vehicles and rolling that out? Lyle, why don't you just start us off?
Lyle McMillan, UTA. Let's talk NEVI.
That was actually my first question for you. See, you're already in front of it.
So the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, one of the components of that is a $7.5 billion program to install like 500,000 fast DC chargers across the country. And as part of that program, it was decided that it would be rolled out through the DOTs, the Departments of Transportation, as transportation projects. And so it's formula funded, which means that Utah is expected to receive about $36 million over the next 5 years of this program as an 80-20 match program. So in order to unlock that $36 million, we are putting together a project or program, project implementation delivery to figure out how to get that 20% match from public, private, and quasi partners to bring that match to the table and get Utah's highways electrified. And the way that that it's required is that we had to put together a plan wherein we proposed that we would place fast DC chargers at no maximum distance beyond 50 miles. So every 50 miles on Utah's highways, we would like to have 600 kilowatt installation, which is 4 simultaneous 150 kilowatt ports. And it looks like the standard is becoming CCS, and so that's the direction that we're headed. And then there's a Buy America component, which currently we have a waiver, so we're trying to figure out how to take advantage of that and get as many moving towards implementation so that we don't have to wait in line for the supply chain and the domestic ramp up to happen, because it's still up in the air. One of the other things, so the first year program, we are required to focus our efforts on the interstates. And so this is a 5-year plan, and so this gives us a tiny bit of breathing room to plan out what happens after we get the interstates rolled out. Because we really, really want to work with or align our plan with Rocky Mountain Power's plan. They have $50 million to do something that's very similar to what the NEVI plan is. And so that combination and that teamwork is something that we do not see in other states. And it's an opportunity for us to partner and align ourselves with somebody like Rocky Mountain Power and the rural electric co-ops to make sure that the rural parts of Utah have access to fast DC charging and get to places where people want to go and points of interest. And so it's really exciting because it's not, I mean, out of $5 billion, we're only going to get 36 million because of the way the formula works out. But with Rocky Mountain Power's funding as well, it gives us a lot of opportunities and a lot of flexibility to do things that other states aren't going to be able to do. So we're really excited to move forward with this.
Yeah, that's great. How why don't you take the ball from there and talk about electrification, particularly of our fleet as we roll out, and you know, and how we're making that happen.
Okay, thanks, Jay. I wanted to maybe come back and want to touch on kind of a why, how, and what as we go forward. So kind of looking at what UTA is doing, as Carlton mentioned, we've got a plan to buy up to 200 battery buses in the future. And so looking at kind of why we're making that investment, what does it make sense, what's the business case for that? So when you start looking and stripping it back, a battery vehicle is just more efficient from an energy point of view. So our diesel buses, we actually do really great. We have awesome operations people at UTA, and they're very efficient on how we're driving the buses. And so we get about between 4.5 and 5.5 miles a gallon, depending on where the route is going. Our electric buses get the equivalent between 15 and 20 miles a gallon. So there's a efficiency that comes in with moving towards electric. And then as you start looking at, you can power that with a number of different sources. So we can start to power that with renewables. And as Regan touched on, we can start to tie that with traction power from our track systems and start to drive those costs down. And so there's a business case for investing in electrification, as well as kind of not polluting within our airshed here. And so that's kind of one of the purposes of the forum, is really looking at, you know, when you start to have to electrify for heavy duty vehicles, it's much more complex than, you know, distributed electrification for cars where people are plugging in them in their garage at night. When you start to look at, okay, we're going to plug in a fleet of 50 buses or 100 buses, it's like plugging in, you know, large office buildings onto the Rocky Mountain Power grid. And so that's where we're really working with our partners to look at how to manage that more effectively and how to optimize that, because we do have more flexibility on how we're charging buses. And so kind of looking at, you know, what UTA is doing. So we've got a number of different projects. I'm really excited about all the folks that are talking about rural. We have a project in Tooele County. We're buying 11 Cullen buses, but they're the Ford E-Transit vans. We're buying 11 of those for our on-demand service in Tooele County, as well as providing charging infrastructure. In Salt Lake County, through the VW settlement, we're buying 20 more battery buses that are coming to Salt Lake County next year. We're making a huge investment in our bus garage behind us. We've got a tour today, but that's a large investment, and that garage is moving towards being a CNG and electric. We have diesel fuel there as well, but the long-term vision is that would be CNG and electric. And then looking at our Ogden BRT project, we've got 11 buses we're operating on our Ogden BRT project, and it's an awesome project. We've opened the first piece of that on the Weber State campus. It's providing circulator and shuttle services. I saw an early number, it showed 4,000 riders on that shuttle system. We're hoping for 5,000 riders on the whole project, so we're really excited about that project and the potential ridership impacts from that. So I think those are some of the investments that UTA is making, and I think looking at you know, kind of the impacts to the community, if we're able to provide, as we're providing this charging infrastructure, we've got a plan we've developed with the University of Utah to develop 15 different sites throughout the UTA service area to be able to provide flexibility to operate our battery buses like we do our diesel buses. As we provide those sites at largely park and ride lot locations, we'll be able to then start to really take advantage of that infrastructure, as Regan and James have touched on. So we're really in an exciting time, and you know, the benefit of that is really being able to, you know, heavy-duty transportation has a much bigger impact on air quality than light-duty cars, and so being able to really focus in that electrification space enables heavy-duty to reduce its impact and help improve air quality. And the last piece I would mention as an investment is we've got a partnership with UDOT, and we're working on improving FrontRunner. And so we've got kind of initial piece where we're looking at that system's 80% single track, 20% double track. And so we're looking at initial investments to make that more, add more double tracking, but over time, we'd like to electrify that system. There's big benefits in reducing the amount of diesel fuel use from the fleet. If FrontRunner uses the equivalent of about 300 diesel buses worth of fuel every day. And so when you look at, if we electrify FrontRunner, it'd be like taking 300 diesel buses off the road. And so we can start to see the big benefits of this kind of moving towards electrification. So I'll close there, and
Yeah, no, thank you. And so, Ethan, if we can fire back up this, Raphael, you'd like to show some slides, and I'll turn to you in a moment. So that's a really good segue, which is, you know, we have a wonderful electrified light rail system and tracks and a streetcar and S-line, and that's the future we're going. And there's the thing I'd like to pick up on what Lyle said is, you know, not only do we have NEVI, we have multiple programs now under the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and that is, you know, propelling this forward. Literally, we went from a $100 million a year bus low-no, which was a program to buy low and no emission vehicles, now to $1 billion a year under that law. And so that's allowing not only UTA but transit agencies around the country to both consider electrification and to implement it as well. So Raphael, let me turn to you, because as Hal said, that's the next thing, you know, out there as we build out our network so that we can run more frequently and more reliably. We also have a future where we can, you know, run more sustainably.
Yeah, so thanks again that I'm part of this forum. What you can see here on the picture is our double-decker Caltrain for California. We are producing almost 20 of those train sets for California right now. So what I want to show you today is some information about Stadler in the US. What are we doing here in Utah, and what's going on with battery train sets in Europe right now, and what is our battery train development project together with USU and Aspire. What you can see here is our facility here in Salt Lake City. So Stadler US is part of the Stadler Rail Group. The whole group had a revenue last year of $3.8 billion US dollars. We have 13,000 employees all over the world, so we have 15 locations in Europe, America, and Asia. And here in Utah, we have 440 employees, and we established the company during 2016. At the moment, we have 4 projects for California and Texas with Caltrain, DART, SPCT, and MARTA. So MARTA is for Atlanta, obviously. We came to the States in 2002 with the first GTW project for New Jersey Transport. And between 2002 and 2016, we almost sold 30 train sets on the GTW platform. After that, we also sold some single-deckers on the Flirt platform and also some custom-made coaches for Rocky Mountaineer. At the moment, we focus, as already mentioned, on the double-deckers for Caltrain. We also develop right now the Metro MARTA. And in Europe, we already produced the first hydrogen flirt for SBCTA. We presented the H2 flirt during InnoTrans this week in Berlin. So what's going on right now in Europe in terms of battery train sets? We hit the world record in terms of mileage last year with a 3-car prototype on the flirt platform. So we made 140 miles in pure battery mode. This week we presented the first series produced flirt accu at InnoTrans. So we will ship them to one agency in Germany, which is in Schleswig-Holstein. So the contract consists of 55 train sets only for Schleswig-Holstein. At the moment we have another 2 contracts in Germany, so we will be able to put more than 100 train sets on a battery platform in commercial service within the next 5 years. So that's the, let's say, the technology base we are using for our pilot project here in Utah. So let's get back together from Europe to Utah. We established a co-development project with USU. Aspire, and Regan and his team will be a great part of it. From a commercial perspective, we got a certain budget from the Utah State Legislature to develop, build the first battery electric train set for Utah. We have some tax spec data for you, so it will be a 2-car train set, so very similar to the Schleswig-Holstein project. The minimum battery capacity will be 400 kilowatt hours, and usually we can run that kind of train up to almost 80 miles an hour. So I'm really looking forward to have a great partnership with USU, with Aspire, and especially Regan. I think it's a great opportunity for both of us to establish the first battery train set here in Utah, and on the other hand, I'm looking forward to see some great engineers because we are always looking for great engineers at Stadler. If you think about what's going on in terms of investigation, if we hand over a certain knowledge from Europe to US, we have to take care about US standards and regulation. We want to have US supplier to meet all the regulation like Buy America Act and so on, so we want to be local. And on the other side, especially with Regan, we have to work in terms of what is the interaction between infrastructure and the train set. So we have to think about, shall we load or charge our train set with DC, with AC? What is the mileage we have to run between stations and so on? And last but not least, we have to think about the overall battery capacity on the train and what kind of chemistry we want to use on the train set. So this is more or less what's going on right now between Stadler and USU. And I'm really looking forward to have a great future together with USU and Aspire.
Thank you, Raphael. Thank you right now for all our panelists for their introduction.
I think as we go into discussion, I'm going to step out of the way here.
Yeah. And I have an initial question, and then I want to start, reaching out to all of you and making sure that your questions are asked today. But we just talked about capacity, and I think that's really important question. I was I don't have a plaque for this, but I was the first New Jerseyan to own an electric vehicle, which was the Nissan Leaf, and it was a wonderful experience, but it was also a 40 kilowatt battery, and Mrs. Fox did not enjoy driving that car because she was terrified all the time that she was going to run out of power. I'm working on our second one right now. We'll see where we go. But part of making actually the second one more appealable is the increase in capacity. And I just turn it over to any members of the panel, and Raphael, maybe to start on the train side. where we are on that and how that technology is developing, because obviously the longer you can run a vehicle on its battery pack, the easier it is to consider it as a mode of transportation that's feasible.
Yeah, first of all, we see there must be a sweet spot between infrastructure and the train set. We can increase tremendously the capacity on the train set side, but you have to consider that leads into a certain commercial topic. So we have to increase the price for the train set. So there is usually a sweet spot where how many capacity you have to put on the train, and this has to match to the infrastructure side. So we could easily install more than 1 megawatt hours on a train. We have a specific concept for this, but as I already said, the train set will be more, will cost more.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I know, Regan, you and I have had long conversations about this. A lot of it is like you said, there's almost a psychological aspect, like, oh, do I drive around with this tank full of gas, knowing in case I have an emergency, or do I drive around with this battery full? Even though on a passenger side, most commuters only put in 40 miles a day, so you really don't need a big battery, especially if you could charge at home and work. Your starting point, your ending point, as long as you have charging there, you're fine. And most buildings are electrified already, so you're pretty safe there. It's a different question for fleets, where because you spend a much bigger time in between the 2 points, so whether or not you're a fleet as in big trucking or just deliveries, there you put on, or buses, where you put on a lot more miles. And so I think kind of what Raphael was getting at, it really goes back to the use and application that the user needs. And so it's finding that sweet spot for that user need instead of a one-size-fits-all. I think on consumers for passenger vehicles, right, 300 miles is now that perfect psychological mix, and that's where all of the all the OEMs are going towards. I think the jury's still out on the fleet side, and I know Regan's working on technologies to try to do that differently, to come up with other solutions where you don't have to haul around this battery everywhere you go.
No, if I can jump in, Jay, that's funny that you bring that up, James. I was just yesterday at an event put on by Volvo and Mack Trucks, where they were demonstrating some of their short-range, bigger haul trucks, and then they actually had an electric utility truck that could serve as a garbage truck. And so you think about, the needs, what are the capacity needs for a garbage truck fleet? That's constantly stop and go, and they do over 1,200 lifts of garbage cans each day. And so that's a very unique electrical load need. But then in addition to that, one of Salt Lake County's other sort of largest emission sources are our snowplow fleet. And these, if you've driven here in the winter or up the canyons, you'll see these gigantic orange snowplows driving around. And while the technology isn't there to do a fully electric dump truck, we're getting closer. And actually, one of the questions I had for James and Lyle is these trucks mostly sit in the summer. They don't do much. I mean, we can use them for utility trucks, but you get a lot of the fleet is sitting in a parking lot, and if they're electric, they can be used as sort of gigantic battery storage devices. And so I was curious, in your all looking at sort of load management, would that play a significant role? I mean, if you have large fleets of electric heavy duty vehicles that are idle for some parts of the year, does that play a significant role in demand management, or is it sort of negligible in terms of the larger scheme of things?
I'll defer to James.
It's an interesting question with you're kind of getting back to this whole vehicle to grid notion. Do you spend the money for a battery to then, in this case, I'll first approach it from a passenger vehicle side. So like you go out and buy a Tesla, you're gonna use your Tesla, you're gonna park it in your garage, and then you're gonna use that battery to run your refrigerator. That's not a good use of that Tesla product, right? that premium product there. So it kind of goes back to what is the vehicle, what is the uses? Because you're going into, there's only so many cycles on a battery. So now do you use those cycles? And then what is the value of using those cycles? One of the things we're blessed in Utah is we have cheap electricity. I'm very proud about that. And so, so do you want to use that battery to run, so it's that value proposition. Now there could be, I think on the fleets, the snowplows, that specific case, there could be a business case for that to justify making those types. And they've looked at school buses as well as a potential where they don't put a lot of miles on, and then do you use these batteries for these other? So to answer your questions, I think the answer is yes, potentially. Right now, most vehicles aren't configured to do vehicle to grid right now, so we're not seeing that because you have to sync it into the grid, you have to get the right frequency. So like the F-150 Lightning, for example, is not a vehicle to grid. It's just it's basically like a backup generator. It can run stuff on your house, but you can't send it back into the grid. And there's other technologies that are required to be able to do that. So anyway, so I think, so we're not quite there yet, but I think it's a good thing to be looking at down the future, especially with this business case.
So I have many questions, but we want to get questions from the audience.
Yeah.
So let's start there.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I want to tee this up from the audience because I might know of a question that's out there. I do this all the time, Dawn. But I want to move to sort of our last 20 minutes with this panel. Talk about planning. Talk about how we begin collaborating, where we're going. And Regan, this is a bit of a volleyball set for you as well as with the group. I want to have somebody raise their hand out there. Raise your hand. There you go, Ben. Ben, why don't you talk about where we are with master planning with the city?
So I think I counted 5 different planning efforts that have been mentioned today, which is great. We want to think about where we're going. And let me add a 6th. Salt Lake City, earlier this week, the council approved funding for us to do our own study on EV charging infrastructure. Where should it go? Can it go on city property? Where can we look at our partners, and I see many in this room, where maybe we could leverage our joint resources for that. But to carry the conversation forward, what's the mechanism for this regional electrification transportation master plan? Is there going to be a task force or a committee? Who at the city should I say, hey, reach out to this person to have this conversation to tie all of our plans together? I'm wondering what's next, what's after today.
Ricky, you want to take that to begin with for Utah State?
Well, I think bottom line is we've got to find a way to do this together, and this is going to have to be cross-agency. And so we are in discussions. We're discussions with our state legislature this year as well as with the governor's office. Exactly how that entity is going to be formed is part of the outcome of this discussion. Certainly we believe Aspire can play a role together with all of the university campuses here in the state. But there's going to have to be a coordinated effort across these agencies to see this through. I think this is what the hoped and anticipated outcome of the discussion today would be.
Yeah, and I just begin this by, again, reaching out to the audience and cognizant of the paycheck that I get every 2 weeks. I saw Carlton Christensen raise his hand, so we'll start with you.
This question may be more for James, but I'd welcome. As a residential solar owner, am I a pain in your side in management, or how do you see residential solar or residential, some kind of cogeneration playing in a role into this infrastructure?
Well, Carlton, you're a valuable customer.
Yes.
No, so, residential solar's there's a lot of publicity about it. I think from a macro standpoint, it actually doesn't add a whole lot of power to the system. If you just look at it from just the total amounts of megawatts that are generated and the total amounts of megawatts that are consumed on our system, it is a fraction compared to the amount of renewables that are actually generated in large systems, whether that's the big wind farms in Wyoming or big solar farms that we have throughout the state. So there's a challenge because it's the economics of it. You know, this that whole problem with net metering, right? It's generating, you want to send power back when actually the market price for solar is low, or the market price for electricity is low, but then you want to get paid, you know, high retail prices for that. So there's that whole issue. Macroly, it's really not a big issue except for you getting money and someone else has to pay you for that. And so that's really the big challenge. But I think in the future, I think, especially new construction, on-site generation will play a bigger role. I do see that happening. I think there's going to be a combination of on-site generation, on-site storage as well. And so we're actually doing a project right now, we call it Connected Communities, where we're looking at that, especially when we're looking at all electric buildings, where you're having now heat pumps, water heat pumps. One of the biggest uses of energy is actually heating water. Most people don't realize that. It's not powering your lights or your refrigerator, it's actually heating your water. And so how we manage all of that, having some on-site storage, some on-site generation, interconnecting that into the grid, and then where we can optimize that, and then we can optimize that with our transportation systems. I do see that playing a much bigger role as we move forward.
Great. Maybe a question for Lyle. With the NEVI plan and so much money going into these new charging systems and quite a bit going in, obviously with Rocky Mountain Power, do you see a lot of coordination happening at the MPO and city level for what they're doing with municipal fleets and what they're doing with public charging for some of their cities as well? Or is it mainly that you guys are going to be focusing on the interstates and really the alternative fuel corridors?
It's a great question. In year one, we're required to concentrate on the interstates because that's what they're saying needs to happen. And we've identified 19 sites to be able to, once we've got those installed, we hope to get considered built out, and then we can go anywhere throughout the rest of the state. And one of the important things, or also a very significant element in the NEVI plan that we submitted, is extensive stakeholder engagement with local communities, with MPOs, there's like 30 different stakeholder groups that we're required to engage with prior to moving forward. So there's a lot, and that no decisions about us without us. We're going to take that to heart and make sure that it happens. And one of the things that I didn't say earlier that I think I should say now is that UDOT is we are a reluctant partner in this process. We don't own any gas stations. So we don't really want to be in the business of owning electric vehicle chargers any longer than we have to, which is why we're super focused on emphasizing public-private partnerships in terms of implementing this NEVI program, because we want to be supportive of the private sector providing this, just like gas stations and other fuel providers do, and in a way that helps us help the market bridge the gap between EV adoption and accelerated EV adoption, and then doing what the private sector does best, and that's meeting the demand. And so we view ourselves as being kind of a bridge between that EV adoption reluctance and the private sector coming in to meet that utilization need. And so we are looking forward to, and every day it changes. And so it's a really dynamic, fluid situation. And one of the things that we're trying to do is help and partner and not compete.
I have a question actually to all stakeholders who are making some decisions. These programs are exciting, they're great, and I look forward to them getting rolled out. My question has always been about equity and really understanding what the funding agencies will be looking at in terms of reports. Meaning, if we put an EV charging station, we obviously want to show X number of people have used it, and this is great. So could that potentially inherently bias where these are placed, and how can we help communities that may not be able to immediately take advantage of them? Meaning, if I were to put a charging station, I'd probably put it on the east side. That's where it would be used. That's where people can afford electric vehicles, which then further separates the east and the west side. Because of the west side residents who may not be able to afford electric vehicles, then there's no real point, in a sense, of setting up a station there because it won't be as used, so the program will be less successful. There'll be less charges. So how can we start to meet these different needs? It would be more expensive. I would assume that incentives such as electric vehicle incentives or electric vehicle purchasing incentives or such measures would also need to be implemented in order to provide a more equitable background for everyone within the city, and I would assume the county, the state, etc. So that's just a question, or not necessarily a question, but something that I would like everyone to keep in mind. How can we not further widen the gap? And that's something that Michael and I and the rest of the eBus team have been looking at. That's specifically why we focused half of our efforts right now in having the bus go directly onto the west side. And that's where the majority of the bus routes are going right now, because that's been a completely underserved community, understudied. So while I know really well what the east side air pollution is because of the stationary sensors, because that's where the tracks primarily goes, we need to understand the needs of the west side community members, which I don't really see much representation here in this room. And so really be able to see, well, this is a community that is most vulnerable. They already have worse air pollution, and especially if we start to think very technically about things such as cold starts in the winter. Those cars are adding to the pollution burden that's already unduly high in those areas. So having those residents have access to electric vehicles, solar panels, I mean, probably not necessarily specifically solar panels as James already mentioned, but having access to electric vehicles, but then that also needs the infrastructure for electric vehicle chargers. So that's just something that I'd like to just put out there for everyone, the participants in the audience, to think about as these decisions are being made.
One more question.
I just want to make a quick response to that, and I think it's an important point. When we've been looking at where we're going to deploy public infrastructure for fast chargers, we actually did a study. One of our DOE grants we did before, we actually looked at who was using EVs and how do they use it, how do they use the charging infrastructure. What we found was that most commuters don't use public fast charging. So what we realize is, even though there's lots of, if you look at the zip codes of where the EVs are registered on the east side, we don't need to put that public fast charging there because they're not going to use it. What we determined was where we need to put it is on the west side, or in communities of zip codes with higher percentages of apartments and higher percentages of non-owner occupied, so renting houses and stuff like that. So our plan, where we're going to deploy the fast chargers is who would actually use these, and so what we determined is it'll probably be more on the west side that would actually use these fast chargers more so than here. So what we found by taking that approach, what we believe ended up with an equitable solution. Instead of, we didn't approach it directly trying to solve it from that sense, but what we determined was that actually does achieve it.
Yeah, James, I can testify to that because that's where I was always looking for a charger with my Leaf, which was in the densely populated areas, as opposed to my neighborhood because I had a charger in my garage. Well, Representative Christopherson, I'm sorry.
So real quick, this question's for James. I know that you want to electrify, we're trying to electrify things so that we can reduce pollution, but even though we get this infrastructure in place, it's still going to be a few years before the sources of power that energize that electricity is, like you were talking about, headed towards zero emissions, because you're not going to be able to do this completely with renewable energy. So I was just wondering, what do you see as as the timeline for, bringing in nuclear or other renewables or whatever so that you can reduce the emissions?
Oh, thank you, Representative. That's a great question, because I know that, I stay up in the middle of the night, or, wondering how are we actually, as a business, we've always been hesitant to just make these arbitrary claims. All right, by 2050, we're going to become this. And we were kind of recognizing that there's a lot of businesses out there just doing that because it's so far out. Like, oh, okay, we don't know actually how we're going to get there, but we're just going to make the claim, and eventually we'll get there, and someone will figure out, I don't have to worry about it because I'll be retired, right? That becomes, you get a lot of that going on. But so that's a great, and we're beginning that process now, because we actually are working on a nuclear project in Wyoming at our Naughton facility. So this is a coal plant that we're shutting down, and we're going to replace it with a nuclear reactor. If that can prove out, and that technology is designed such to really come in more modular, if it can prove out, then we can just pop those into our other coal facilities, which is an important issue, especially in Carbon and Emery County, where we have two big plants in those communities, the workforce that supports those. It's about, we're not going to be able, it's a long process. It's about 8 years before getting construction, and this is accelerated. This is with the federal government investing about $1 billion, and our partner investing another $1 billion on that, the TerraPower, which is invested. So that's with an accelerate. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get that base load transition. In the meantime, we are adding, Utah, grown renewables as well into the system. So it's kind of this ongoing transition as we move. As I mentioned, by 2030, we'll be at about 75% lower emissions as we're bringing some coal plants offline and adding some renewables. And then in about 10 years or so, hopefully we'll be having a little more of some nuclear facilities that are kind of now blended into this.
Thank you. And I'm going to wrap up this session because we have a lot more today. I want to do one thing first. And it leads off of what Ben was saying. When I walked out, again, of Rocky Mountain Power's facility with how the idea in my head came, this regional electrified transportation master plan, that's way too much of a mouthful. So here's how I envision it and moving it to. I'd like to move away from T-Rex. T-Rex is all those dinosaurs that are giving us the source of power that we use now. And let's move away from the dinosaurs and move into the future, into what I call the T-REP. So it's transportation, the regional electrification plan. And that's what we like to see this, as we go forward. We'd like to, talk about that more as we head into the policy portion of our day. Hal, I'm going to turn this over for you in a moment to talk about the tour. We have a Gillig bus outside. We'll have a wonderful lunch, and Mayor Wilson is here, as well as Representative Moore, who will provide us a keynote address, and then we'll move into our policy session this afternoon. But one last time before we move on, and then Hal, I'd like you to take over, Hal. Please thank our panel for their work today. All right, Hal, you're on.
So for the next piece, we've got our bus in the parking lot. We've got our Gillig bus that's running on our Ogden BRT route, so we can go out and check out the bus. We'll have tours of the depot district. We have pretty limited numbers of people that can go through at a time, so we've got it set up for 20 people to go through at any one time. We'll meet upstairs. We've got hard hats and vests and safety gear because it's an active site to go through. So if you want to do the tour upstairs, we've got restrooms upstairs, and then we've got a little bit of networking time. And then I would maybe offer, if folks that are interested in this plan idea, if you want to stay after the 2 o'clock, maybe we could convene for a couple minutes and talk about next steps and ideas.
Yeah, just also say something.
But anyway, today is the beginning of National Drive Electric Week, which is why when Hal and I were talking about this, why today is. So I did want to acknowledge that today is National Drive Electric Week. And also next Tuesday, if you're all interested, at lunchtime at the Rocky Mountain Power building, we're going to have a EV car show. So you can come and bring an EV. We're going to have an F-150 Lightning there. We'll also have a Rivian truck. We're going to have Regan's Tesla compete against the Rivian to see who can tow faster. So no, but yeah, come and we'll have some free food, have some food trucks. We're going to do a giveaway as well, an electric bike. So yeah, so you're all invited to come and check out the cars. And thanks again, Hal, for hosting the kickoff to National Drive Electric Week.
Let me first introduce Mayor Jenny Wilson. I had the privilege of working with Mayor Wilson over the years in a number of different capacities, both as an elected official, as a department director at Salt Lake County, and now in my role at UTA. And Mayor Wilson, without question, is a leader in our community in a bipartisan way in solving issues within the greater community and doing those things which are right. Born and raised here in Salt Lake City, famously a daughter of one of Salt Lake City's mayors. She previously served as a county council member for 10 years and is the first female Democratic mayor of Salt Lake County. Since she has become mayor, the county has become a national leader in the fight against COVID and has made historic investments in affordable housing, economic development, water conservation, and expanding trails and open space, one of her favorite and impassioned topics. Mayor Wilson seeks to ensure that amazing quality of life in Salt Lake County continues and is accessible to all. We want to thank Mayor Wilson for her leadership and her partnership with UTA and sharing her insights with us today. Mayor Wilson.
I'm thrilled that UTA had the foresight to convene for 5 hours today on this important topic. I think it's visionary and forward-leaning to be convening with so many community leaders and community advocates, each of you, to discuss this important topic. We are going to talk electrification today, and I am thrilled to do so, but I want to really take a minute to sort of frame the issue and why, in my opinion, this matters. So, you know, I think it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that our climate is under threat. We tend to want to divide around this idea of how we frame the sense of urgency. I go back to serving for a congressman in the 90s, and Al Gore was vice president, and Al Gore was very deliberate in his conversation around what he framed as global warming, and scientists framed as global warming. We now shifted the idea of climate change as being more of the buzzword, but you know, we want to argue about whether or not we believe or we don't believe, and I think we're now here understanding that climate change is a real threat, and I think we're seeing more of a, whether or not we call it that or something else, a recognition that we have to invest. So with that, I don't know if I'll see Speaker Wilson today. I know he was on the agenda, or perhaps I'm confusing him with someone, but in any event, I know that Speaker Wilson is very committed to addressing our water issues and the real risk of a Great Salt Lake, the footprint diminishing. I know you all hop on an airplane on occasion and can look out the window and see it for yourself, right? I was so thrilled to help host Secretary Pete Buttigieg recently, where he addressed a critical program. He came here to Utah, spent a day with us, addressing one of the programs under the infrastructure bill that is specific to our challenges here in Salt Lake County and throughout the state due to fire risk
And in fact, the bill itself is also resiliency for things like earthquakes, which we have suffered as well. In fact, I had quite a year, as you all did during 2020, but I joke, I was at the command center first for the health emergency. Then the earthquake hit. We were moving through dealing with the earthquakes impacts when this, the 100-year storm hit and knocked down trees and power lines and everything in between. And so when the secretary was here, I had the chance to tell him the joke that we've all heard kind of floating around. Well, as far as we know, we don't have locusts rising and whatever else, but The Walking Dead. But it's been a rough time. But back to my point, we are seeing and feeling and understanding, all of us, the pressures right now. So this idea of electrification is really one of many steps that can get us to where I hope we all agree we need to get to. And that is investment in infrastructure, doing it in a way that is supporting the market, because the market is not yet there in terms of being able to provide the toolbox that's necessary to cover the costs of investment to keep us ahead of this challenge. I wish we were. I like to call myself conservative quite often because I work, as you all do with your businesses or organizations, on a daily basis to, cover the bottom line. I mean, I run an organization with 1.2 million people and a $1 billion budget from various funds, and we balance our budget every year. So I try to approach things with an eye to cost and return to the taxpayer. Having said that, we have to invest in government. Transportation dollars flow through the federal government. There's been this, and I had the chance to work there in the 90s. I was chief of staff to Bill Orton. Many of you may have remembered Bill. I loved that we, like you, Congressman, were trying so hard to create that bipartisanship that's necessary to move initiatives forward. And during that time with Bill, we were actually on the front lines of the Red Line. We helped fund and advocate for the creation of the Red Line, which was our first TRAX line in the 90s, and we got that through, which is a big deal. But you look at our kind of web, the complicated web. Many of you, if any of you work in finance here for UTA or for any of our agencies or are part of that, you know that complex model to roll federal funding to the state downward. Andrew Gruber here and Jay and the team at UTA, all very much part of that conversation as we are at Salt Lake County. But ultimately, if we are going to change the game, and I implore you, we need federal investment. It's just required. The market cannot bear the cost. Now, I'm not a scientist. In fact, I was like, I reassure my kid, who's a junior in high school, that I wasn't the A student in math. I know a little bit about budgeting. I've learned along the way, having worked for a congressman on the budget committee in the 90s and having to literally come out of budget meetings today, dealing with that tough issue of compensation this morning, going into our 2023 budget. I generally get it big picture, but I have absorbed over the years. I was there for one of Al Gore's PowerPoint presentations, if it was even called that in the 90s. His multimedia roadshow that he took on even after he was vice president and absorbed. And I tell you, one of the things that was the coolest things I had an opportunity to do was to go out yesterday to look at Volvo big haulers, or their mid-range, I guess I can't call them big, I got the term wrong, and also the garbage trucks by Mack that are now electric. And I asked him, what is the cost differential for one of these trucks compared to, and our fleet teams were there, right? How much more will this cost? It was a several $100,000 differential. Well, I can't rush out tomorrow and retool our fleet so that every one of our vehicles is electric. But what we can do is, with the federal government's help, find a way to subsidize a few so that we can kick the tires on the trucks, figure them out, and know how we will be able to invest as the technology improves, batteries improve, and we are able to move things forward. So, I commend UTA for its deliberate action to electrify, and I think as they you will roll this out, you'll be able to take advantage of advancing technology. I'm here to ask that we give more than serious consideration, that we actually electrify the canyon as we look at that first phase, as we move into what may or may not be a gondola long term. I say no, some say yes. That will settle itself, but in the meantime, we need to now invest in the first phase, which is, let's make it easier for the neighbors. Let's make sure my kid doesn't miss a ski lesson, which has actually happened in the past. Knew how to navigate it, getting up to Alta, you've learned too, for those of you who want to be there on certain days, weekends, and snowstorms, and those problems are real. But we do have a window right now that's been provided to us to get some busing going, and we're there. There's still some questions around it, but we ourselves at Salt Lake County have kicked the tires on that enough to know we don't need to have polluting buses moving us up the canyon as we modernize that fleet. Additionally, I thank you for the deliberate approach. Let's keep on it. Let's look at where and how we can repurpose federal dollars, see if there's more than we've done. We want to keep up with technology. And the hope, again, is that market takes over in this space, but without government investment, we're going to need to fund. It's just a reality. Or we can be the victim of our changing environment. So with that, I want to really quickly touch on a couple of things that Salt Lake County has been doing. Much of this made possible through federal funding. Again, we see this unique time where we have seen federal dollars land in the county's lap, in the states. There's a very complicated argument about what we should have done, but in fact we did. We did invest with CARES Act funding. We did see with that initial appropriation during the Trump era, almost universal. I can't recall if there were any no votes on the CARES Act funding. We received around a $200 million appropriation so that Salt Lake County meaning Salt Lake County was in a position to address health. And we did, but we did many things right. Our diversified economy, we got through it, and we had a nice debate about how to handle masks and everything in between, and we landed in the middle. Here we are, but we did spend. The federal government put money into the state actually did what Salt Lake County has done and repurposed that under expend and applied it to transportation. So there was a $1 billion bill last year. That's federal money. It moved through generally CARES Act. And now we then ended up with another round of funding, which is infrastructure. There's a CARES Act too, kind of related. We apply our under expend to the highest and best use in the community that's specifically COVID related, but we are looking at deferred maintenance, and I'm really proud that we were able to we're in the process of converting 3 soccer fields to some form of astroturf that's the kinder, gentler, more modern form, I'm told. And it's gonna allow us to play on our fields for longer. For those of you who have kids in soccer or whatever else, we're gonna keep our fields open longer with these new fields. But we're also reducing water enormously. In fact, we have reduced our use at Salt Lake County alone by 3 million gallons. Back to the electrification and kind of that space, we have invested in green and healthy homes where people who are in need financially can apply for a grant and get a new appliance. And that appliance is modernized and is creating less emissions, which is important. We have an Office of Environmental Services. That was something I initiated first month of serving as your Salt Lake County mayor. 15 of our county facilities have solar panels. So we are working very hard to do what we can. I'm very happy about many elements of the infrastructure bill that are providing $7.5 billion nationally in electric charging stations. We're going to receive $36 million in this state alone for charging infrastructure. The infrastructure bill had resilience fundings, the money that I was sharing that Secretary Buttigieg came to Utah to talk to us about. We can apply for the needs throughout the state of Utah to better prepare for fire and other challenges. Our airport is supported through that bill. $32 million in pollution cleanup, electric buses, as was mentioned, supporting UTA's deliberate attempts to, or plan to electrify. A school bus program. I will be reaching out and have, to a certain degree, to see, hey, I hope you're on this, can we help you? Because let's flip our school buses and make a difference in the community as a whole. My central message, and I'm gonna wrap up, is we need to get past Washington gridlock. I hear it, I know that's a point of yours, right? I agree. Okay, I hear yes. It was there when I worked there in the 90s. It remains. If we can move more towards conversation, invest in the right way. Local governments get this, and I think that we will continue as Salt Lake County to educate, to inform, to invest. We appreciate this generational opportunity that has come recently for investment in this space. We're not here to debate the cost of that, but the fact of the matter is we do have resources. Let's put them to good use. Let's use this critical moment in time to move the needle in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Pleased now to hear from Congressman Blake Moore. Congressman Moore is a native of Ogden, Utah, a problem solver, passion for overcoming partisan gridlock and helping organizations manage change and improve government. He redshirted as a quarterback for the Utah State Aggies, graduated from the University of Utah, and earned his Master's of Public Policy and Administration from Northwestern University. He served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Seoul, South Korea, which I've decided the church sends tall people to the Orient. My brother served in Korea and I served in Japan. Somebody had a lot of fun with that. Congressman Moore, we thank you for joining us today. We know your schedule's busy. We've always been welcomed as we've visited your offices and have had support of your staff. But we're honored today to have you participate in this forum and look forward to hearing your thoughts and your priorities.
Thank you, Carlton. I walked up during the middle of his bio, so he'd have to hurry on the bio, so I don't have to hear much about myself. I appreciate the chance to sit with you.
Hey, I don't mean to interrupt, but you and Congressman McAdams both have the same kind of broken cell phone, so I can tell you're working very hard.
Yeah.
I remember, like, Ben, come on.
There's constantly
Constant
dropping
work.
it in and out of. In Washington, you live your life in 20 minutes. And it's my least favorite thing in the world. I came from a management consulting career, just, kitty corner from here at Cicero Group, that I wanted to actually mention a little bit about, and where you got to actually dive into a topic. My staff gets the pleasure of doing that, but I live my life in 20 minutes, 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there, and it's tough. So I'm looking forward to being able to spend some time with you all today. As I wrap up my comments, I'm good on time and open up to any questions that you have. I always find that to be some of the most impactful time that I spend with folks. Is I pick and choose what I think is important to share, but if there's anything in particular, I'd love to address it. Just the only thing I try to be pretty candid and in my communication in politics, and sometimes you don't get that from politicians often, and I really do try to emphasize that. There's one time that I like to pander, though, and be a complete pandering politician, and that's the pin that I wear. I got a pin for basically every situation. I could have worn a UTA one, I could have worn an Aspire one, an organization affiliated with Utah State. I actually chose this one today, the Golden Spike, because I firmly believe, and I tell my colleagues this constantly, that solutions out of Utah create good outcomes. Utah, was known and was put on the map because of the Golden Spike and our innovation and our ability and being a place that was willing to, embrace the future, embrace technology, and come up with good outcomes for our nation. And we have that spirit within us. and this is no different. That's why I'm thrilled to have worked with UTA since joining Congress. I work with a really strong team that they have, led by multiple people, but it's congratulations on being appointed again. And they've been productive meetings. They'll come, meet with our office, meet with my legislative team, and we have the opportunity to put in requests. You know, not everything, the individual transportation infrastructure type of requests that we get to do for certain types of funding. I love it because they're bite-sized, they're small, they're impact-driven. Legislation should be built that way, in my opinion, and that's why we have representatives that cover the entire country, right? It's because we know our districts, we know the things that are needed, whether it's a sewage system in Manila out in the Uinta Basin, or if it's some type of interchange, or the electric bus opportunities in the electrification aspect, and that's going to continue to be a part of our portfolio. We get them through our portion. Sometimes that doesn't work out in the appropriations process, and that's something we don't have control over. The most recent one didn't play out that way, but we are going to continue to lean in and work with Andrew Gruber, Wasatch Front Regional Council, these organizations like League of Cities and Towns that are led by local elected leaders and appointed leaders that know their communities, and we will lean in and do whatever we can with the federal level to try to create as good of opportunities as possible. I'm really proud of the fact that right before the August recess, we got our bill finally through we got it passed through the House. It's the U.S. Geological Survey for the Great Salt Lake and the Great Basin region, something that we've worked on heavily, and the reason why was because our state legislature, our governor, our local leaders, hey, what can you be doing at the federal level? And this is the best option we came up with, is supported by Audubon Society, environmental groups, industry groups, Ski Utah, and of course, all of the Wasatch Front and Utah-related elected officials. And so we got that done. There's other versions of it going in the Senate, and hopefully we can reconcile the two and get something so we can lean in at the federal level and help with that. Utahns, it's always fun. Politics always makes this topic really fun. You see polling on it. Utahns are okay if Republican politicians use the word clean air, but they cringe at climate change. Been through all of it, been through the ringer on all of it. And that's just a way for me to be aware of what's going on. Climate change will be a little more, climate crisis, you'd run into a problem if you said that kind of stuff. So it's like, it's the politics of it, something you have to navigate. But as I saw, one of the questions on here is, how can you come together on this? Well, the Great Salt Lake bill we did, I co-sponsored it with one of the most liberal members, and go look at his Twitter account for proof, of my committee's Democrat conference. His name is Jared Huffman from Northern California, and we have a voting record that's very, very dissimilar. But there's an enormous amount of work that gets done in Congress you'll never hear about. You don't hear about the collaboration. You only hear about the turmoil. You hear about our debt, but you don't hear about the Secure 2.0 Act that passed with overwhelming bipartisan support that actually helps us save for retirement, creating less burden on our Social Security system later in life. You don't hear about that kind of stuff. So that's one point of my message that I want to bring, is there is a lot of good collaborative work. You hear about the big stuff. And in an election year or not an election year, but in a year where, the reason the infrastructure bill became so, how would you say, political, let's just call it that, became so political was because you all of a sudden had a total shift in power in Washington. You had the White House and the House of Representatives go Democrat. And then a few months later, the Georgia Senate runoff finally took place, and that flipped from red to blue. And it was, okay, we have 2 years, we've got to get a lot of stuff done. And in a year where you would have split government, the infrastructure bill would have been very similar to the farm bill. The Farm Bill is going to be in the next Congress. You know, the Farm Bill is discussed, and if you're aware of the topics or the issues, you're probably a little bit engaged. But for the regular citizen, like I was, I never really knew what was going on. Half of the infrastructure bill was everybody was supportive of. There was, it's just a reauthorization. Then the additional half was where it became a little bit tumultuous, because then you had members, oh, that's enough for me, and then I can avoid this $3.5 trillion bill, and all this stuff plays on. But in split government, this last year, the infrastructure bill would have been very, very seamless, and probably wouldn't even have gotten that much headlines. And I kind of wish that would have been the case, to be honest with you, that we could have done it that way. But it is what it is. The way that we could be thinking about, the solutions with respect to a warming climate, electrification is a key piece. And guess what? Electrification's not the most politically charged concept. It's figuring out how we get baseload power. Baseload power is the key. And for the Republican argument, is natural gas has reduced emissions by more than basically anything that's been in existence. Why not embrace that? And if we have to continue to find ways to sequester carbon, let's make that be an option. Let's make sure we're embracing nuclear and not let the politics and the perception of nuclear, the Fukushima or things on the Eastern Bloc that have taken place. Let's not let that. We can do this better, but we have to have something to provide baseload power. And then you do what Rocky Mountain Power is doing. 30% of their portfolio is renewables. I'm fully supportive of that. I love that. I'm a Republican sitting here saying how much I love what Rocky Mountain Power is doing. And in fact, brought back Gary Hogeveen, the head of Rocky Mountain Power, to speak to a bipartisan group of individuals. And the Democrats that left that room came up to me and said, that was the most fascinating presentation I've heard on this topic. And I had no idea to the extent that our environmental policy is actually limiting our ability to embrace more renewable technology, because of the NEPA regulations that exist don't allow for transmission lines to be developed, and you're gonna need transmission lines to keep these buses going. Right? That's the point that's the stuff that you don't hear about, because it's not the headlines, the headline grabbing type of topics. And so do enough. Traditionally, have Republicans come to the table on this? No, they haven't. That's why I'm so grateful for the work that Representative John Curtis is doing, because he fundamentally changed one small thing on the Republican conference back in Washington. Was it's okay to talk about it, because for a while it was like, well, I represent rural Utah. That's where our energy is produced. There's the industry itself is getting attacked. I need to represent that. And then it became like, oh, there's a denial of what's going on with our climate and global warming and things like that. And that wasn't necessarily the case, but it just was, that's where the politics of it were. But you go and you interact, and it's in an organization like ClearPath that I've interacted with an enormous amount. And that's my role on the Conservative Climate Caucus. The work in ClearPath's been a big push for that. And you can go, I won't spend much time talking about that, but that talks a lot about baseload power. It talks a lot about how conservatives can lean in on this issue better. And the part that was always fun in me was like, okay, so if we're worried about those types of things, like the industry, oil and gas industry itself, they are talking solutions and working on climate change initiatives for far longer than you've heard Republicans in Congress talk about it. And that was the key thing that John Curtis did, was sort of change the script a little bit and be willing to embrace that. The Conservative Climate Caucus is like the second largest caucus in the GOP conference of all 210-ish, 212-ish members. And that's helping kind of get a seat at the table to really kind of come together and see where we go. So several of these bills got through. It's going to provide some funding to embrace it and help create the infrastructure that's there. But again, we have to be able to figure out how we're going to address baseload power. It needs to be, in my opinion, an all the above approach, and in areas that we need to sequester carbon. And even though it's expensive, well, everything's going to be expensive. So we have to be able to figure out those trade-offs. I'm grateful to be back there in a situation where I can talk about this freely and really strongly communicate, what the conservative point of view is on this, because there is a lot of collaboration and work that's being done. With the Republicans, election season's on everybody's mind. If the Republican House takes the majority, it'll be incumbent on us to figure out what areas that we can be doing, and I want to continue to see an embrace of reducing emissions, because at the end of the day, we need to reduce emissions. And how's the best way to go about doing that? And I think there's a lot of really good options out there in a bipartisan manner. So, thank you. Look, I did a ton of research for UTA, not a ton, but I did several projects when I was at Cicero before here. The work that you all are doing, it's obviously we're talking about the electrification and what this network is doing. But your work on first mile, last mile, it's so key, right? I had a breakfast meeting in Ogden this morning, and so I drove up and I drove back. And as I was thinking about that, like, how do we change my mindset to say it's going to be a better option for me to jump on Front Runner? It was on 25th Street, wouldn't have been too far to get there, and then get back down here and right to where UTA is. And I made a mistake. I could have planned that better. So what are we doing as a community to embrace that? And the first mile, last mile work, I know it's a key issue that you're working on. We work with High Valley Transit because it's part of my district, and helping them create opportunities. We have the Olympics coming. Let's leverage what we have up ahead to really build that into our system. Wasatch Front Regional Council focuses heavily on intermodal and figuring out transportation overlays into housing opportunities, and it's key, and it's something that we want to be a part of as far as my office, and we'll continue to engage as much as we possibly can. So thank you. And looks like I got a new pin. So
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you, Mayor Wilson. As mentioned, we'd love to have questions from you, and I'm happy to start off with one. I bet one of you is ready to raise your hand, and let's go to questions first, and if not, I'll insert a few. Do I see any daring volunteers? It's always the first one. All right, please, back here. Let me get you on mine.
And by the way, Representative, we have travel trainers. We will get you wherever you need to go in this valley on our system.
I'm Jeff Reinhardt. I work for UTA. And I was just thinking as you were speaking that the government infighting is cumbersome and raging sometimes. But what I personally find the most disheartening is the fact that this country doesn't seem to do anything big anymore. We used to put people on the moon and build interstate highway systems.
And join the railroads.
Yeah, and now we can't even seem to agree after 4 decades of debate that climate change exists. We're the wealthiest country this world has ever known, but we don't have an electrical grid that rises to that occasion. We don't have high-speed rail. We don't have a nationwide push on renewable energy options. Why do we continue to sell ourselves short? And what do you think it will take for us to make some of that stuff happen again, whatever those big ideas are?
Absolutely. Oh, great. I love it. And I'd agree with you. I've traveled to Europe, and I expect to train around. I expect to take high-speed rail. That expectation isn't necessarily here. The expectation is to land and get a rental car. In most cities, other than a couple of our big New Yorks, and even sometimes Washington D.C., but even then, it's not the case. I will say this, that the political infighting, I've only known one experience. That's my first term in Congress, and it's been more than palpable. And that started, I never expected the term that I would have. It was kind of, you're still raging in COVID, then you got vaccine with January 6th, and it was just, even the interactions that we had with each other, it was just, it was tough for the first 2 quarters of my time. And then Afghanistan hits. I mean, it's been a brutal first term, and I have nothing else to compare it to. But I hope the second term, if I'm fortunate to get elected in a month and a half, is different. That said, the media loves to not show that I am very good friends with lots of members on the Democrat side. That majority is that way. They're not going to highlight, again, the Secure 2.0 Act. They're not going to highlight that the vast majority of bills we pass, so we suspend the rules and they pass on more than a 2/3 vote. That's the majority of what takes place. The media loves us to be divided. The media thrives and the media makes so much money off of us being divided. And also, fringe members of each party thrive on us being divided and perpetuating that. I often do a fun little experiment by raise of hands. Who's heard of Patrick? And I'll list off certain members, all of them leading the top 4 committees in, on at least the Republican side. And nobody's heard of any of these people. Patrick McHenry, Kevin Brady, this and that. Then I'll list off some of the more prominent or more strident or flame-throwing members that love to be on cable news or build a big Twitter profile, and most people have heard of them. Well, who's running the policy? Like the people that are running the policy are the individuals that have built a more collaborative approach. And so, but my worry is that we are only able to do big things. We can't even figure out immigration. To me, that's the easiest fix in the world. And there's a lot of members that would love to come together on that 3-pronged approach as far as good policy, border protection, or strengthening the border, and then revamping our flawed system so we can encourage better legal immigration. Like there's a lot, we're there, but things get hijacked by this constant battle for the majority, this constant media play, and it's frustrating. So I want to be a member that can cut through it. We'll see. I'm in the depths of the minority on the freshman side right now, but I've got really good, strong potential on committee assignments. I'm building good policy chops with an awesome team, and I think that Utah presents a lot of cool opportunities that we, just go look at the Salt Lake Chamber's Compact on Immigration. It's the most sound, thoughtful document that you'll see, and we need to be running that at the federal level, and it takes both sides, because I get criticized for stuff that's absolutely atrocious, and it's ridiculous, and it's not helpful either. And we return the favor in a lot of ways. But it's not the majority of members, and we got to figure out how those voices become stronger.
Mayor Wilson, Salt Lake County's pretty split politically. How do you move things forward?
There's a lot to that question. So I'm sure I could probably chunk it out and give you a perspective maybe in 5 different areas that you've touched on. To answer your question, Carlton, I think one of the benefits of our governance at Salt Lake County is we have to pass a balanced budget every year. And that brings both sides to the table. We have a certain level of discipline, but I'll tell you, we do not have the funding to do big things. We don't. So that's why I was so appreciative. I know it's I'm one of the few active Democrats in this state, so I'm gonna say it. I'm appreciative of the opportunities provided first by the Trump administration, everyone who rallied Congress to provide money to the communities. Then the next phase of Biden appropriations, I'm all for, because we do not have the revenue to do big things. We run Salt Lake County very well. There's a lot we can do better, and we're working on it day in and day out. I have the hardest working staff, I think, anywhere, many of them here, and we are visionary. But again, I'm in budgets this year to establish the 23 budget. The reason we can do big things like those soccer fields, it's a little thing, but in many respects it's a big thing, was because of the federal dollars that trickled down to us due to this crisis. Some of us are referring to the end of 2024 as the fiscal cliff, because we're gonna be in a world of hurt when we can't rely on that revenue anymore to do those big things. And those big things have allowed us at Salt Lake County to engage with the community in an unbelievable way due to COVID. I can't think of the figure off the top of my head, maybe someone on my staff knows, but we have distributed millions and millions of dollars in rent assistance right now. We know this volatility right now with employment. A lot of it is baby boomers aren't coming back after they left the market, right? It's not just, the factors of the federal dollars that help people stay home during COVID. There's a lot to what's going on right now, but we have this unique window. I'm very happy that it happens to coincide. I'm happy and not, because I had a real world of hurt dealing with, as we all did during COVID. It was a tough time to manage. Your point about being a new congressman in that era was not easy. But we are now in a very good position from Salt Lake's perspective to do some game-changing things, not just in this space, but again, the engagement with the community at a base level to get interventions into areas that desperately needed them. I want to just touch really quickly on the idea of, and not to bore you with my politics, but I was very committed to Hillary Clinton because I felt like I'd worked with her in the 90s, that's when I served, and I felt she knew what she was doing and didn't have that confidence with other candidates within the Democratic Party. I felt like she had shown to be effective. I was not in the Bernie Sanders camp, but I agree with him every time I hear him and Robert Reich and everyone else sound the alarm bells for wealth inequality in this nation. Because you can't tax people more to do the big things you're suggesting that I agree with, that I would love to do, if people can't afford the price of drugs and can't afford to take their kids to the doctor and can't afford basic needs, and they're working 3 jobs. Until we fix that as a nation, I believe we're completely broken. I also think, first and foremost, if I could be queen for a day and impose one thing, it's campaign finance reform. He and I should not have to go out and do what we do and spend the time we do. We should be serving you, and it would be very little to our bottom line as a nation to pass that minimal amount to do a fair campaign system. Like, that's a biggie for me. So all of a sudden, the reason I shared all that about Hillary Clinton and everybody, it's because I was not in the Sanders camp. But a lot of what he stood for, I believe in my heart and soul, and I think I'm hopeful that the next generation says, yeah, this is not, corrupt's too strong a word, because I will tell you, I don't know Blake that well, but he and his colleagues, every last one of them, work their butts off, because I lived it and I saw it in the 90s. Didn't matter if you were red or blue, if you were rural or urban. You're one of the 535 members of Congress. You work very hard. We mean well, and we should respect each other's positions in politics. But and sorry for the long-winded answer, but that was a complex question. But we should not have to spend a third of our time knocking on doors to industries, to people, to come up with this wacky way of campaigning. To be a candidate is very different than governing. I can tell you that.
Thank you. I think I've gotten the thing that we're about to our end of our time, but Jay, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, well, first, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. The one thing that echoed from both of you at the end was the very thing that we're talking about today, which is collaboration. That if we're going to move forward on this issue, if we're going to work to build a sustainable future, it only happens through collaboration. And that's the theme of today. And in fact, when we move to our policy meeting, that's going to come up in just a couple minutes. That's where we're headed. So thank you both for airing those sentiments, because they're really important.
A round of applause for our keynote speakers. Thanks.
Felt like a debate. We're ready for the next debate questions.
Now that you're in my
running against
district. No, wait a minute, you're my congressman now.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
I thought I was going to get peppered with questions from my new.
Go ask former Congressman McAdams. He basically said, yeah, being mayor's pretty good. So I'll stay where I am.
Yeah.
It's my privilege first to introduce Tammy Bostic from Utah, Executive Director of Utah Clean Cities. That's your cue for an applause. And I'll let her take it from here. I'll let her take good reins for the policy discussion we're going to have. I'll just mention in introduction that we got to sit down yesterday and just talk about both of our work and this forum as a whole. And like any good executive director, because I have affinity for this, she immediately put me to work by asking me to be on our board. So
Of course.
kudos to you. You know, this is going to be a wonderful session, and in many ways, I'm handing off the RTEP, you know, the T-REP baton to our transportation regional electrification plan and that concept. So take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. And of course, we have an amazing board, and in fact, 4 of our board members are here today. We have Debbie Lyons with Salt Lake City. We have Hanko Kiesner with PacSize. James Campbell also serves on our board. And now we have Jay. And so that's exciting. And I'm sorry, I'm looking at your name. Yes, and Steve Handy.
Whoever he is.
He's on my list. I'm like, okay, I hugged him when he got here, so that counts. So we have an amazing board. So Jay, you'll have a great time with us. So Utah Clean Cities, just to give you a quick overview if you don't know what Utah Clean Cities is and what we do, we are just getting ready to celebrate 30 years of working with alternative fuels and vehicles in Utah. So that's really an amazing opportunity for us, and also a nod to all of our partners, which over 90 stakeholders and 80 fleets work with Utah Clean Cities with advanced fuels and alternative fuels and infrastructure, so that's exciting. And we began our program essentially before there were alternative fuels with idle-free. It's like everyone could do it, right? Turn off your key, be idle-free, don't idle your dirty bus, all those things. Thank you, Steve Handy, for that as well. So we are excited to be here today. I have my team members here, and again, we're surrounded by board members, so it's an exciting opportunity. Utah Clean Cities is part of the Department of Energy Vehicle Technologies program, and we are the only program under the Department of Energy that works with advanced and alternative fuels. So we have a very important role right now at this time in history, and it's very, again, an opportunity for all of us to work together very closely. This is the time in a very carbon-constrained world. We have one opportunity now to get it right. We have to get it right now. So as I see us convene and talk and lean in and say we want to be bipartisan, we want to collaborate, we want to work, all things on the table, and those are the things we keep saying. All things are on the table. It may not all be electric, it may not all be natural gas, it may not all be propane, it may not all be biodiesel and renewables. It's all those things, anything that's cleaner than what we have, right? So we're all working really hard to see that happen. But today, we're excited to talk about electrification, and that's what our panel is here for, to talk about our policy and the business case for transportation electrification. So our panelists today, we have Hanko Kiesner, and we have Senator Ann Milner, and we have Derek Miller, sorry, and then we have Senator Wayne Harper, and Representative Kay Christopherson, Representative Angela Romero, and Representative Steve Handy. So give them all a warm welcome. So let's get going. This is such an amazing panel, so let's get them talking and sharing their thoughts on this opportunity. So this first question goes to Hanko Kiesner. Please tell us about your company, PacSize, and what you have done related to electrification, and in what ways has electrification benefited your business, and I'm going to add our community.
Thanks, Tammy. I immigrated from Germany to come to Salt Lake City and start PacSize. PacSize is a packaging business that right sizes all the packages. Who here in the room orders online? Pretty much all of you. Who receives packaging that is too large? Okay, those boxes were not made by PacSize. So one day, all of the packaging will fit perfectly, and that is what we do at PacSize. We provide our customers with technology and software that enables a process flow that right-sizes all the boxes. What I didn't know when I moved here to Salt Lake City 20 years ago to start this business, and we are now a global company in more than 26 countries, and we are a headquartered business here in Salt Lake City that also provides very interesting jobs where we make global decisions. But what I didn't realize was that I'm moving into an polluted airshed. And a few years into me moving here, I developed asthma. And I went to the doctor and he said, yeah, you have to take this little pill here. Now, that was not the solution that I wanted to hear. I wanted to learn about the root causes of why people get asthma and get all sorts of diseases here. And I embarked on my journey of understanding this problem. Then I realized that most of the emissions are actually coming from mobile transportation. Some of them are coming from buildings, and then the rest comes from industry. And what I realized was that this is a very fixable problem, and if I'm affected by it, then all of our employees will be impacted by it. And then we began hiring people, and that's when a labor shortage also occurred, and I realized that it is difficult to attract people to Salt Lake City because you can just Google air pollution, and many of the high-powered executives and leaders that we are looking to hire, some of them didn't want to move here, and that limits us as a business in growth, in delivering the sustainable solution that we are providing us, and it hurts all of us. And that is when I realized that the solution is actually rather simple. But it is a transformational change problem as well. And so I decided that we as PacSize, we needed to provide to our employees charging stations for free to motivate all of our employees here in Utah to go to work and to go back home with zero emission and also zero cost, because our charging stations we don't charge our employees for the electricity that we are dispensing. And that program was so successful that then we started a non-profit and said, what we can do at PacSize, any other business here in the Valley and in Utah and all across the United States can do. And so that's when we created Leaders for Clean Air, that in partnership with Rocky Mountain Power has now placed more than 2,600 charging stations at more than 400 businesses here in the state of Utah. All of them delivering free power to their employees. And Tammy, then I joined your board because we are all aligned along this topic. And so that is my journey into why this is important for businesses and for all of us regarding our health.
Thank you, Henko. Henko has the largest workforce charging system in the state, and we applaud his leadership. He has a solar array, and it's a living laboratory there, and his innovation and great leadership has done so much for Utah. So thank you, Henko, for sharing that with us. Next, I would like to present a question to Derek. From the point of view of the business community, what is the importance of policy investments in transportation infrastructure? And how does the business community view investments that have been made to electrify transportation?
Thanks, Tammy, for the question. I also want to say thanks to UTA for putting on today's conference and for inviting me to participate. I thought the keynote discussion we had and remarks we heard from Mayor Wilson and Congressman Moore were very insightful and enlightening as they were speaking because of where I was sitting. There's a sign taped over here. Can you see that sign, Carlton? What does the sign say?
Push buttons gently.
Push buttons gently. I thought they both did a really good job of that. And I'm going to try to do the same. So for those of you who don't know, the Salt Lake Chamber is a business association. It's the state's largest and longest serving business association. This year, we're celebrating our 135th anniversary. So longer than the state of Utah itself. And we take great pride, not just being around for a long time, but for 135 years having as our theme common ground. We really view our job as to provide common ground upon which not just business leaders, but certainly that's our central focus. But also, if you come to a chamber board meeting, which Carlton serves on our board, you'll find business leaders, education leaders, elected officials at the local, state, and even the national level. This is the common ground that we talk about common challenges and find solutions for the common good. So that is the background of the chamber. Specific to this issue, it's so important to us because it's the nexus of two of our bread and butter issues. The issues of the chamber would not surprise you. They include taxation, regulation, education, transportation.
those will never change in my lifetime. But the electrification element of transportation is so critical because our members of the business community want to move towards a greener future. I think we all do. But you'll always hear us talk about moving towards a greener future in a balanced way, and what we're seeking to balance is affordability, reliability, and sustainability. And so what I think is wonderful about electrification is that it allows us to move forward in that balanced way.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So I'm going to open this next to all of our panelists, and of course, being mindful of our time, I think we have about 45 minutes. So for all, and please, when you feel the urge to jump in first, please do. What have the current and past policy actions done to support or hinder the business community's effort to electrify?
Let me jump into that.
Okay, thank you.
Did I beat Senator Milner?
Yes.
Oh. Sorry. Oh, Derek, do you want to lead out?
No, you want to lead out, and I want to hear from Senator Milner.
So over the years, we've taken a pretty stringent look at what we can do to go through and clean up the air. If you go back to when first records that I really saw from DEQ, it's in 1974, and one time I walked into a room and they had air monitoring clear around a huge conference room showing PM10, PM2.5, NOx, VOx, particulates, all those type of things, and showed that steady decrease in that through when I saw that about 3 years ago, okay? We've done a lot of good. It used to be that we were talking about, point source where most of the dirty air was coming from. We've had businesses that have really stepped up and cleaned it up. The auto industry has done the same thing, and our cars, our newer cars, are far more cleaner and less pollutant than what we've had in the past. Now, as we're talking about that rolling into electrification, we've done a lot of good in that. One of the things I'm quite proud of is for the last decade, we've gone through as a legislature, and DEQ has gone through with some of the federal funds that they've had, and started to go through and say, how can we go through and implement, charging stations? We've got different type of charging stations out there. Level 3 is the one that everybody wants to have nowadays, and you see those mostly along the interstate freeway. But we have gone through as a legislature, and business and cities and counties have taken some of their resources and said, we're going to put in these charging stations. Some have said we're going to go through and put in solar panels and that. So I think we've got a pretty good step forward on this. Is the work done? No, but we're making progress just like we have done for decades on air quality.
Thank you. Senator Ann Milner.
So Senator Harper, I think, and at least in the Senate, is our transportation expert. But let me tell you a couple of things that I think are really important in this. First of all, this morning I had a call from Julie Kinley, who said to me, as you're having this conversation, just remember that companies like Ford are now talking about the role that they play in charging stations and creating the opportunities. So we really need to think about this as a public-private partnership. This isn't, we need to come together. Dealers and others are willing to make investments, but we can't just have some kind of scattered plan out there. We need to be thoughtful about that public-private partnership in this area and making it work. And so, Brent, would you please let Julie know I did my work here? The second thing is, many of you know that I'm affiliated with Weber State University in addition to serving in the Senate. And we just launched the new BRT system, at least on the campus. So it's electrified, using electrified buses on the campus. Well, I've been around for a really long time, and the event center used to be a place where we had parking. And but the problem was we had to get students shuttled from the D Event Center lot onto the campus, and if we didn't, they weren't likely to use it. Well, we started out with diesel buses. Not only did we probably create and continue to exacerbate the problem, we also made our neighbors mad and everyone else that was around us. So then we decided, let's go to natural gas buses, and we did that. But we were still on city streets and doing what we needed to do, but it was an improvement. But now I watch the BRT and the electric buses and what they're able to do in terms of creating the right stops and the right places and the right kind of transportation. And by the way, our students are really using it. It's interesting to watch. There's not just the psychology of this being better in terms of being better for our environment, but students and others see it as more convenient, more up to date, something that they're willing now to really engage in. And so in the first week of class, we had lines for the buses, which is something that never happened in the past. So I think what those stories say to me is this is our work. It's not just government's work in the traditional sense of putting policy together. We need to come together as a Utah community, something that we do really well here. But let's think about this as a way of how do we bring our business community in? How do we bring, UTA is clearly an important part of this as we think through how this system gets built out. But I also think the third element is how do we encourage this kind of work in our colleges and our universities and our school districts, et cetera. There are a lot of buses out there on the road. They're really important in terms of helping our students access transportation. They also cost a lot of money. And one of the things we found in the Weber State journey along doing all kinds of sustainability projects from geothermal to having large solar panel areas, et cetera, is every one of those investments, every one of those projects helps to save money as well. So at the same time we're contributing to the environment, we're also saving money. It may take, and that may take a little while to get the payoff, but so you have to make some upfront investment. But I actually think we can see this as how do we support the quality of our environment and at the same time save costs for government and in our institutions.
Thank you, Senator Milner.
Yeah, hi everyone. Representative Steve Handy from Davis County from the Layton area. And I got involved in, as a lot of you know, in some air quality things a few years ago when we were trying to replace dirty diesel school buses, and had some success after 44 years getting 115 or so clean fuel school buses with a match from the school districts. And the way we got it was through the Volkswagen cheating scandal settlement. There was an additional $7 million that came, and Governor Herbert directed that to this initiative, and it's been really a great thing. And from there, I've gone to work in lots of things in regarding air quality, and one of the co-chairs of our bipartisan Legislative Clean Air Caucus that convenes on the Tuesday night before our interim meetings. And we've been doing this for 10 years, and it's just amazing what we're learning, just the education. So, and UTA has done so many great things as well. I've toured the UTA facilities with your buses and see the great things you're trying to do. And a nod to Weber State University. The Weber State Davis is in my legislative district there on 193 in Layton, and the Automotive Technology Center there is it's world class. And I think Weber State is really, of our institutions, really the leader in moving out in sustainability. I've been thinking about this part of the question about hinder, about hinder. I mean, as a policymaker, all of the policymakers here and Senator Milner, we try to find ways that has to do with the proper role of government. Sometimes we try things and they can't work. Like, for example, we do not have in Utah any kind of a tax incentive for EVs. We've tried that a few times and haven't been able to get that through. There's still a pretty good federal incentive, and And I have looked at it in terms of, we as humans, we're willing to pay more for what we want. And we want cleaner air, and that's going to come with this electrification. We've made a lot of progress with our pollution from tailpipes with tier 3 gasoline that the legislature did incentivize the refineries a little bit. So I think that one of the things that's going to happen kind of organically is, I'm going to say this, we're 13 hours a drive away or a couple hours on an airplane from the world's 5th or 6th largest economy in California. So when California makes a policy recently about there will be no fossil fuel cars sold in California, is it 2035? What is it? It's 2035, Beth, thank you. When that happens with a smaller state like Utah, where they have 37 million people, in California we have 3.2 million. I put it like this, and I said this in a news article, that when California sneezes, the rest of us catch a cold. And so there's going to be a lot of things happen that are going to accelerate the adoption and the lowering of prices of EVs and the electrification and the charging systems, the infrastructure that's going to be so critical. But there are all these backbone charging systems, in our freeways, and the federal government's put money. The Rocky Mountain Power's done an admirable job as well. And I think things are moving, and it's just very important that we have convened together like this and we talk about it in ways that we have the awareness.
I want to add something. So I'm Angela Romero, and he is right. We do some stuff at a bipartisan level, but I think some of us on my side of the aisle, we want to speed it up a little bit and go a little bit faster than some of the guys on the panel with me, and they love me because they know I'm always going to be honest and straight up. And I started my career in public service. I worked for Mayor Rocky Anderson, and he was talking about climate change before people were talking about climate change, and so I just want to attest to some of these elected officials that have been talking about electrification, from Mayor Anderson to Mayor Becker to Mayor Biskuski, now to Mayor Mendenhall, and all the stuff we've been doing at a city level. And for me, I feel like it takes a little longer at the state level to do some of the stuff I would like to do, because I always look at this from an equity lens because of the district I represent and the people I represent. And so I think it's really important to mention that eventually we're all coming together at where we want to go, but some of us just have different routes of getting there. And so I'd like to see cleaner energy used and using more clean energy. And I can tell you a lot of my colleagues on public utilities and energy and technology are not on the same wavelength I am, but we'll eventually get there and work together. But again, sometimes California could be a bad word, but sometimes it could be a good word because it makes us speed up.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, let's move on to the next question. Thank you so much. 40% of our local air pollution is coming from mobile sources, and that's pretty much true and the standard across the nation. Exponentially here for us, and more so in some of our communities, such as the communities that Angela Romero represents. So we would like to talk about this a little bit more. So tell us the importance, and I'd love to begin with Representative Romero. Tell us about the importance of investing in electrified transportation in light of air quality challenges, and you can expand on that as you would like.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Mendoza might have talked about this a little earlier. I wasn't here because I was at my full-time job. But for me, really the electrification is critical because as we know, the air we breathe is not the same. And so a few years back, myself and Senator Escamilla worked with Dr. Mendoza and got some air monitors put on our tracks line just to measure what was going on and the air that, what it looks like. And then Representative Handy has worked with Salt Lake County and put on some air monitors on the buses. And so those air monitors have been really useful in us, like pinpointing and talking about the distinction that the air we breathe isn't the same. And so for me, the electrification is really important because of the constituencies I represent. Salt Lake City and UTA has worked hard to get more bus services down to the west side, to make an east and west route for us, and that's helped out a lot, but we have to do a lot more. I mean, I would love to see the trains that sit and pollute in between east and west do something about that, whether because we can't do anything about that right now, and Representative Handy's done a lot of work on that, as well as Representative Schultz. But for me, it's critical that we electrify just due to the fact of the people I represent, and also when people are getting in and out of buses, what are they breathing right now when they're exiting and entering a bus? And so those are just things that many of us don't think about, because a lot of us have these privileges. But I have a lot of constituents who have to wait outside for a bus even when the air is dirty. They're not aware that they have to wear an aversion mask. And so for me, the electrification piece is critical for my constituents, as well as the education piece about how electric cars are becoming more available now. I have several constituents that are have electric cars and using the charging stations around the city. We have one right there by the Peace Gardens. And so for me, the electrification piece is critical for not only me, but for my constituents, and it really talks about that equity piece.
Thank you. Anybody else want to take on that question as well?
I'll
Derek.
mention, first I want to underscore what Henko already said, which is the air quality issue presents a challenge in recruiting talent, but it also presents a challenge to keeping talent. So even people who came here or people who grew up here, today is the model, right? Today is the goal. Look outside. I mean, we want every day to be like today. And taking 40% off the top of those emissions that are coming out of tailpipes would be huge.
And we can't forget about our everyday people, our marginalized people, the people that put the food on our table right now, that cook the food for us. We need to make sure that we're protecting them too. I agree with you. We definitely need talent. We need people to come here. But we also have to think about what's going on in Salt Lake City right now. And there are people in my district that have asthma. There are people that have, because of the air, there are a lot of things that go on, and they don't have health insurance. So this is much more than electrification. We have to look at this as from a holistic perspective and from a social determinants of health perspective to make sure that all Utahns have that equity piece and they have that equal access to live a life where they have health insurance, they have a job, and they have transportation together, and they can put a roof over their head.
And I would love us to have someone speak, and I'm going to look at Hanko because I know he has a great response to this. But when we talk about who's exposed to this, and just like Representative Romero, who are the people that are exposed to these emissions, whether you're driving a diesel vehicle, a diesel off-road equipment piece, you're working in a restaurant, you're just exposed to more in your community. But what about people who are the operators of these vehicles? And so that becomes a really big priority for our work to say, that's a social justice piece. Why is it overwhelmingly the people who are lower income exposed more to emissions at the tailpipe and in the work that they do? So that's something for us to solve for as well, right? So Hanko has a great analogy when we start thinking about electrification as we solve for our power distribution, right? You know, we have Rocky Mountain Power talking about renewable, and so that's much easier to control a power plant than millions of cars driving around with different tailpipes, right? So tell us your tailpipe story, Hanko. It's the best.
So who came to this meeting with the tailpipe? Okay, that's still quite a good number. If your car that you now purchased that has a tailpipe, instead of a tailpipe had a front pipe. A front pipe is a pipe that emits its pollution right in front of your car, and you are the first one yourself to be exposed to your own pollution. Who would have bought the car that you now bought? Nobody. So what this means is that you are perfectly fine polluting the air for the person driving behind you, but you're not perfectly fine being exposed to your own pollution yourself first. And in urban traffic, where we are always driving behind somebody, the tailpipe of the person driving in front of us is actually our own front pipe. A car that none of us apparently would have bought. Now that leaves us with a pretty significant moral challenge, because basically what we are saying is we are fine exposing people behind us to a problem, to a health risk that we ourselves would not want to expose ourselves to. So it's in that way a moral challenge, for which there's a really simple solution, Tammy, and that is to not have a tailpipe at all. And that
There
would
we
be
go.
the solution, right?
Zero emissions at the tailpipe, that's our goal, right? Beyond zero. So this last year, the year before, we added a child and a parent to our idle-free sticker, just to remind us that it is selfish to not consider when you're at a school zone or where you're around children, or any of us, that you're idling your car if you have that nasty tailpipe. So, all right, so let's move on to the next question. So for all, what is the current policy-related challenges to electrification of our transportation sector? I was hoping you would raise your hand. Thank you. Representative Christopherson.
Thank you, Kay Christopherson. I'm on the Transportation Committee along with Senator Harper, and my background is in transportation, and I'm a civil engineer. I've been involved in this a long time, but you know, as Senator Harper said, we are improving all the time. In spite of the population growth, our air quality is getting better. But we all like clean air, and we want to improve that as much as we can. Some of the challenges are two things: technology and expense. And I think as we go through and we have, especially the private industry getting involved with their innovation, they're looking at this and saying there's a very good opportunity. We can create a good business out of this, but also be innovative, and the technology is improving at such a rate that it's bringing costs down and making it so that the resources that we need to make clean air affordable and a reality is happening. So, but it takes some time, and you know, we want things right away. We're a microwave society. We want things now, and it's happening. But I think we just need to be patient and say, you know, we only have so many resources as far as the money that comes in. We don't want, as a government, to get in the way of private industry, because sometimes as we get involved ourselves as a government, it takes the incentive away from the private market to get involved. So I think we can work with them and help them as much as we can, reduce regulations, and coordinate. You know, I like the way the direction this morning is, you know, the government can help bring people together and coordinate efforts to accomplish the goal of clean air that we're all wanting. So, you know, it takes time and energy a little bit, but I think we're getting there.
Thank you, Representative Christopherson. Senator Millen.
So I think the other challenge here is thinking, I mean, we're a rural state, and many of you get on the road and you head to St. George or down to Kanab or Lake Powell or whatever. And so while it's not difficult to think about how we start to manage this along the Wasatch Front, I don't think we can forget that we're a state that has a large rural section. So for me, I think one of the policy kind of questions and investment questions is around how do we do this in the right way, and make sure, because I can think about, I mean, I know people who, and you all know this, that are kind of make decisions around, do I think I can really buy this car and get where I want to get, and be able to access it, right? And that I can go wherever I want to go. Well, if people start to build confidence in that there's sufficient availability, et cetera, that they can do it, then they're going to start to say they will make consumer decisions around going this direction. But we do have to have that infrastructure in place. And I think the question between urban, rural, our interstate systems, all that is a particularly challenging question. The second question is, how do we do this? And I mean, how do we think about this and kind of just a bunch of charging stations? Or I know Utah State, and I don't know a lot about the research they're doing, but I know they're doing a lot of work around thinking about how we may be able to embed this in our highway systems. And so we may need to think outside the box here. Because if we could start to do that, then I think we realize the vision that a lot of people want to realize. But that means we need to be willing to think outside the box. We need to tap into the resources and the expertise that we have in the state. We probably need to pilot some projects and see where we can go with this. But let's don't think this is just, I'm worried that we think about it just as a series of charging stations along the Wasatch Front. And I think we have to think much bigger and more distance and how this really works. And I don't have those answers, but let's don't think small here. Let's think big. And when we make, it's like the interstate highways. When that investment was made, it was a really big investment. This is going to be an equally big investment. Let's try to get it right, because it's going to be expensive. It will be important. It could be, Utah could be a leader here, but we have to do it right.
Well, I appreciate Senator Milner's, she's always spot on in her comments and her questions. She's always asked the right things. Following up with that, I think if you take a look at where we are today and what Senator Milner just said, we have a lot of choices that are ahead of us. We've made choices, for generations here in the state of Utah. People came here for whatever reason, for employment, for hospitality, for religious purpose, whatever it may be. But now we're living with some of those things that we're talking about. And let me harken back to one thing, and this, Senator Milner reminded me of this. People, even the Native Americans, when they're here, I read some excerpts from what they said. They were complaining back when the pioneers came in here, Dominguez and Escalante, that these Wasatch Front valleys in the winter were not really habitable because you'd get that thermal inversion and it was too cold to be down here. Well, we have chosen to live in a beautiful, beautiful basin here. We've got beautiful mountains on one side, on the others. We have to learn how to deal with that. And Senator Milner is spot on. We can't just be thinking about what we are doing here in Salt Lake County along the Wasatch Front. Okay? Most of my family's from rural southern Utah. They're talking about saying, Representative Christopherson and I are leading the charge on, okay, let's look at road user charge. Let's look and see how we can go through and support the expansion of electric vehicles and infrastructure throughout the state. They're saying, are you kidding me? I am not going to be able to drive my truck or charge up in Escalante, get to Henryville and then into Panguitch, which we've got to do a couple times a month. We don't know if we're going to have the electrical infrastructure. We have to make sure that we have the reliable generation of that. And sometimes we say, well, it's zero emissions. Well, in somebody's airshed, that is being made now, okay? Whether it's with a solar panel or natural gas or coal or whatever, but we've got to make sure that this is sustainable. So I guess I'm kind of rambling on here, but just saying we've got to take a look at our heritage and figure out where we're going, because we've got some serious decisions to be made, and we've got to make sure that they're done right.
Step back in. I always love Senator Harper because he's always trying to figure out how do we pay for this, and he's right on there. I mean, sometimes we think about what we want to do, but we also have to have willing communities and willing citizens in the state that are willing to pay for it, and we're going to have to do it differently. So at the same time we're trying to move to electrification, we have to think about how we are going to fund this infrastructure in a different way than fuel tax. And that's really hard because Senator Harper has been working on that now for years and telling us we've got to figure this out, we've got to move in this direction. But we need people thinking about this issue not as just this particular piece is a good thing to do, but this is part of a larger system that takes thinking about how we put all the pieces together.
Tammy, regarding rural Utah, you put these stickers here on our on the panel here. This is a sticker that represents the electrification of all of Utah, and electrification represents a tremendous business opportunity for the rural economy. It draws tourism, it draws an experience when you can travel somewhere without emitting anything. And I traveled Highway 12 the other day, a few weeks ago, with my electric car, and it was a nail biter. It's the most beautiful highway in the world, probably, to travel on. And it was a nail biter because there wasn't enough charging stations. And I didn't know if I would make it. Now, however, if I got stuck, I would have been stuck in a beautiful environment. But there's a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous story that Utah can tell if we were to electrify the rural parts of Utah, especially national parks and where tourism can be attracted to, because that also means income for the rural communities. And dwell time determines how much money is spent. So if you're plugged in somewhere and you're plugged in and you want to be plugged in longer to recharge more, that means business for whether it's a restaurant or a retailer or the location that it is. So it's a tremendous opportunity, the Charge West program. Tammy, and thank you for your leadership in that.
Well, and I want to say it's an 8-state partnership, and it was started by Utah's governor and Colorado's governor in 2015. And so this is a long time coming. This is 7 years to bring us together, where we launched this brand this summer, and it does focus on rural infrastructure. So we have our interstates fairly well taken care of, but this builds out infrastructure for our rural communities, which many of them are lacking 3-phase power, which you need for fast charging. So it's a great opportunity. It also further, in part 2 of this, is going to address our communities that are disadvantaged, our disadvantaged communities, which overwhelmingly around our national parks, they lack public transportation, they lack housing, they lack work opportunities, education, access to medical care. So it makes really good sense that we are providing transportation, ideally electrified transportation, electric car sharing, those types of things in our rural corridors. So let's go, I didn't mean to derail that, but it's an exciting thing because it started in Utah.
So let me ask Hank a quick question here following up. So what I heard from you is that there should be no level 3 charging stations in rural Utah. So for their rural economic development, so they have more hotel nights and restaurants and employment, there should only be level 1 and 2 charging stations. Is that correct?
I think you make a very good point. I think it should be a mix, but you're totally right. A lot of the charging actually can happen while you're parked when you go on a hike. So anywhere where the car is parked for hours, we don't need a fast charger, but then you need a fast charger like me traveling on Highway 12. I would have loved to have a fast charger there. That is true.
And to clarify, on the Charge West corridor, it is part of it ties in with the NEVI plan that we talked about this morning, which there are fast chargers every 50 miles for it to be part of the alternative fuel corridor. Utah received great exceptions where we raised our hands with our federal folks and said, we're out west. You could drive for 100 miles and not see a gas station. So let's be realistic. So we had some exceptions of upwards of 36 miles in addition to the 50. So that was amazing. So they listened to us. We said, out west we're different, and we're glad of that. But they are fast chargers along the corridors. They have to be. So, yeah. But once you get there, you can dwell. So, Derek.
So there's one part of infrastructure we haven't talked about yet, and that's the grid. And if we're talking about electrification of transportation, we better also include in that the reliability and resiliency and security of our grid system. The Salt Lake Chamber in a couple of weeks is going to be releasing a report called Utah's Business Vision for Our Energy Future. We spent the summer talking to business leaders across all industries. I mention that because their understanding of electricity is not at the same level as your understanding. I say your understanding because you're all here today because you have an inherent interest in this topic. But I want to make sure that you all understand that for most business people, they're just thinking about, are the lights going to come on when I walk into my office, when I go to my manufacturing plant? Is this going to work? And they're not thinking about, it doesn't mean that they're bad people, doesn't mean that they're ignorant people. It's just not on the top of their priority list. This is something that we discovered as we went out over the summer and did this. if we don't, we cannot find ourselves in a position where we aren't thinking about it anymore. And certainly as it relates to our grid, there was some discussion earlier about California. California ought to be a lesson learned for us
What not to do.
of what not to do when it comes to grid resiliency and reliability, so that we don't have to have our government elected officials saying, hey, that was really great that you went out and did what we asked you to and bought an electric vehicle, but don't plug it in, because our system can't handle it now. This is part of that moving forward in a balanced way that I mentioned.
I would agree with you, but Representative Handy serves with me on Public Utilities, Environment and Technology, so does Representative Christopherson. And we can't even get to an agreement of what we're to do with the grid. And so this has been a conversation that we've been having since I've been elected. And so again, we have to remember too, as the senators pointed out, we have a diverse Utah. There are some people within that are elected with us from small town Utah, from rural Utah. I'm from Tooele. It's like suburban sprawl now, but their attachment to coal, and it's part of their identity. And so we have to be realistic about that and how that's part of individuals that we serve on public utilities with and other committees where that's part of who their identity is. So how do we make sure we are not taking away people's identity, but transitioning energy sources, because we're going to have to, and there are a lot of people who serve with us that are very resistant to that. And so we have to find a way to have a robust conversation about it where we're slowly transitioning and we can actually talk about diversifying our energy portfolio, because I can tell you, a lot of those conversations get shut down.
Representative Handy, thank you.
A quick perspective that I wanted to bring in, that is that, in addition to being interested in working in policy areas in air quality, that also related, I'm also interested in the advancement of new energy in a smart market-based way that can occur. And I had an opportunity, Derek, to weigh in on one of the questionnaires on your report, and I'm so looking forward to having the report come out. But what I've been learning is that and I'm remembering this, that I think that American entrepreneurship and ingenuity and innovation and capitalism, it's one of the greatest forces in the world. You can say, problems, okay, but the greatest forces in the world. And I believe that in trying to think about this as a policymaker, what is the proper role of government? And I've been coming down, government can provide these temporary incentives to stimulate and to move it up, but you've got to be really careful, because then it becomes, and we saw this with our rooftop solar, then it becomes, you're propping it up and it isn't really market-based. And so I've been coming down lately and thinking a lot about what are the barriers that government throws up? What are the barriers, and how do we remove the barriers so that companies like Henko's can just go and do everything they can do? So that's a difficult balance that we as policymakers are always trying to figure out, because we all want the same thing. We want a cleaner environment. We want it done in a sustainable way, and we want it done so that our electricity remains, affordable. I mean, Utah is a gem in the way that our electricity prices, and we've got to be very careful about the balance is there and not force it too much that it gets out of whack, that it then hampers down the economy, because it could really do that. So thank you, Tammy.
Thank you. We should stay on for another hour, but here's dessert and coffee. It's a big topic, but
can I make
yes.
one comment? I'm also a fan of capitalism, and it's a great system. And but when the cost of pollution is socialized, which it actually is, then I would call that portion of the system socialism. And so at the moment, polluting is free for the company or for the person that creates it, and the cost of pollution is burdened or bared by the person who is getting sick. And so that I would actually call socialism. And so I would love to have a system where the profit side is capitalized and capitalism, but also the cost side of the balance sheet should also be capitalism. And that means we cannot burden society with the cost of the pollution and basically socialize it. So that would be what I would
fantastic.
love.
Well, we're going to end on a love note, because we've had such a great day and so much positivity. There are specific challenges to all of this, and I think that this is why, again, we say electrification is coming, it's here, and also everything's on the table as well. So we are going to transition in the most thoughtful and effective and fast-paced manner that we can. So this is for all of our panelists. This is a big dream question. In 1 or 2 sentences, because we only have that much time, please describe your vision for the future of Utah's clean transportation sector. So we'll begin with you, Senator Harper. 1 or 2 sentences.
Just very quickly, I think we need to take a look at our rate structure with the PSC. Okay, rooftop solar should be back and doing better than it should. And second of all, we've got to look at how we're going to generate the electricity in a 24/7 reliable position going forward so we can expand out.
I'm not sure why this is such a tough subject. I have a flux capacitor in my car, so
Sure, anyway.
But I think we need to look at all of the energy forms and look at, with technology improving, we're making a difference, even in the fossil fuels that are much cleaner and being used. So it's going to take time, but we're getting there, and we do need to keep in mind the reliability. We do have some challenges from the federal government on some rules that they're making that could accelerate the decommissioning of some plants, which would really put us in a situation worse than California. And I think we've got to just be patient and say, let those who are generating power get their investments out, and they'll move on their own to cleaner energy. So anyway, we've got to look at all options.
Thank you.
Well, I want to applaud UTA. We're sitting right here in your headquarters, but I want to applaud UTA for the efforts at the legislature's helping the electrification of Front Runner, the double tracking of Front Runner. We need to get more people into mass transit, and if we can get more people into mass transit, that'll solve a lot of our problems, help us a long way.
Great vision of the future. Thank you, Representative Handy.
Yeah, and I guess I would piggyback on Representative Handy, but for me, I'd like to see us use more renewable, cleaner energy. And I think that we're there. I think we need to look at what Utah State's doing and other places are doing, and I think we can get there. But also, what Derek mentioned, we have to look at those transmission lines as well, and it seems like we're stuck right now.
Thank you, Representative Romero. Derek.
So much of our current transportation system was planned and built in anticipation of the 2002 Olympic Games hosted by Salt Lake City. We're going to get it again, either in 2030 or 2034. I would love to use that as a rally flag and have the first ever fully electrified Olympic Games.
Wow. All right. Good vision.
That's a great vision. So for me, if I'm going to get to dream, it really is that we have built out a system that truly is able to allow anyone to get on the road, go anywhere they want in the state, be able to have continuous charging, but it's backed up by a large capacity, resilient grid system.
Beautiful.
So here's my moonshot. I'm dreaming of a zero-emission society in every aspect. That means electricity for all of the transportation that we are doing. That means heat pumps for heating and cooling buildings, also with zero emissions. We can do that today. And then the last one is hydrogen for all of the industrial processes where you need a lot of energy. And then we have a zero-emission society, and we can all be happier.
Hanko, I knew you'd wrap us up great. Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank all of our panelists today, and I will turn over to Jay. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. The dominant theme for me as I start from where we started at 9 o'clock to where we are now is that electrification requires unification, a unified approach. If we're going to move from T-REX to a regional electrification plan for transportation to T-REP, then that requires collaboration. And there's an appetite through this entire room for doing that. So the next time that Hal and I walk out of Rocky Mountain Power, we have a plan for where that infrastructures go. We're not thinking alone. So we're going to be here for a little while. I think Regan will be here as well. Where are you, Regan? There he is. And just talk about what our next steps, how we involve every party in this room, because I agree with Senator Milner. It's everyone. It's public. It's private. If we're going to plan for this future, it's collaborative. And so, maybe it starts with a working group and building towards a leader potentially to help us build out a plan. So thank you again. I want to turn this finally over full circle to Carlton as a last words.
Well, we won't delay you, but just thank you for your partnership and thank you for those who have participated today. If you have any follow-up questions, our staff would be happy to work with you, and let's do this work together. Thank you and enjoy.